Hi guys, tonight we drift into a winter night on the old frontier, and you are the one riding late with the sky already turning to iron. You can almost hear the brittle grass snapping under your horse's hooves, that dry, glassy sound that only comes when the cold has squeezed all the softness out of the world. The air smells sharp, like pine needles and faraway snow, and every breath you take feels like a small scrape in your throat. Somewhere ahead, a low line of hills cuts the horizon. Somewhere behind, your camp is only a memory and a faint smear of smoke. And let me just say it plainly, with a little wink from the future, you probably won't survive this if you treat winter like a minor inconvenience. Not out here. Out here, the cold is not a mood, it is a force with opinions. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And if you're listening from some cozy bed in a city apartment or a cabin in the woods, drop your location and local time in the comments. I love knowing where this little nighttime campfire is burning around the world. Now, dim the lights and let your mind settle into the saddle with you. You are riding into the Old West, but not the shiny movie version. This is the West that knows winter. The West that, on certain nights, can turn a tough person into a quiet, shivering question mark. Even when the sun goes down clean and orange, the temperature can free fall the moment darkness reaches the ground. 1 minute, you are coasting along with that late afternoon glow warming your cheek. The next, your eyelashes are gathering tiny beads of frost, and your fingers feel clumsy inside your gloves. If you have ever stepped outside on a modern winter morning and felt your lungs pinch a little, multiply that by loneliness, distance, and the fact that there is no heated car waiting for you if things get uncomfortable. Your world right now is a wide, open stage. The prairie spreads out like a frozen ocean, rolling and pale under a starlit sky. You catch the whisper of wind over grass that has turned stiff as wire. The horse under you is warm and alive, and you can feel the animal's heat rising through the saddle, almost like a borrowed blessing. But horses get cold too. Their breath comes in soft white bursts, and you hear the faint rattle of tack as you both move through the night. Every sound feels louder in the cold, like the air is more honest when it is this thin and sharp. And you know, even though the word cowboy makes people picture summer dust and scorching sun, a mainstream, plain as bread, historical fact is that much of the cattle work in the late 1800s happened across seasons, including winter. Ranches did not stop existing because the weather got rude. Cowboys still had to feed stock, check fences, move herds, and sometimes ride long distances for pay or duty. That meant they faced blizzards in Wyoming, hard freezes in Montana, sleet in Kansas, and sudden snow in Colorado. In some years, like the fearsome winter of 1886 to 1887, storms buried grass and killed huge numbers of cattle across the northern plains, reshaping the whole ranching economy. You do not have to memorize the date. Just feel what it means. If winter could bankrupt a cattle empire, it could absolutely humble one tired rider. Tonight, you are that rider. Maybe you are trailing a few strays back toward a line camp. Maybe you are riding to check on a neighbor's herd. Maybe you are just trying to get home before your toes stop being yours. The reason is less important than the sensation that the West is big, and the cold is bigger than your plans. You look down at your own kit with the kind of quick, practical inventory that people do when they sense risk. You have a hat pulled low, wool or felt, a stiff brim to keep snow out of your face. Your coat is heavy, possibly lined with sheepskin or buffalo hide. Under that, rough shirts and a vest. Your pants are thick, tucked into boots that might be a little cracked from summer heat. You have gloves, maybe, if you are lucky. And you have a bedroll tied behind the saddle, canvas and blanket wrapped tight, like a promise you hope to cash in before midnight. The cold gives everything a new meaning. The land is no longer just scenery. It is a puzzle you have to read. A hill is not a hill. It is either a shield from wind or a place that will funnel gusts right into your bones. A dry creek bed is not just a dip. It is a possible refuge if the weather turns nasty. A stand of cottonwoods along a river is not only pretty, it is fuel, shelter, and life. You are constantly learning to see with winter eyes. Here is a quirky tidbit to keep you company as you ride. Some cowboys, especially on the open range, carried odd little luck charms for winter, like a rabbit's foot or a smooth stone from a river crossing. But there is also a quieter, more practical superstition floating around. Old-timers sometimes swore that if your boots squeaked on a frosty morning, a storm was coming. It is not scientific, but it is the kind of folk weather sense you develop when your survival depends on paying attention. You listen for squeaks, you watch cloud edges, you sniff the air for that metallic snow smell. You become a little weather instrument in a hat. The sky above you is clear and crowded with stars. The Milky Way looks like spilled flour. Beautiful, sure, but beauty does not warm you. And as the temperature keeps sliding, your muscles tighten, your shoulders creep upward, and your mind starts to narrow to a single question. Where are you going to sleep? You have heard the older hands talk about it. Shelter is not a luxury out here. It is a craft. People imagine cowboys just wrapping up in a blanket under open sky. And yes, on mild nights that works. But in brutal cold, you need more than grit. You need angles, materials, and the kind of decisions that only seem boring until they save your life. Historians still argue whether the average cowboy was mainly a wandering bachelor sleeping rough most nights, or whether many spent more time in fixed ranch shelters than popular legend suggests. The truth depends on region, season, and job. But what matters for you right now is that you are not in a warm bunkhouse tonight. You are out in the breathing cold, and you are about to learn why those debates even exist. Survival looks different depending on where you are and what you can build before the frost sets into your joints. As you ride, you are already picturing options. You could push onto a line shack if you know one nearby. Those little outposts, often no bigger than a tool shed, were scattered across large ranches so cowboys could stay close to distant herds. If you find one, you will find a rough door, a tiny stove if anyone bothered, maybe a scattering of old tin cans, and the scent of smoke in the boards. But distance is distance. You do not gamble on a shack unless you are sure. So your mind flips to the portable choices. You remember the trick of the quick lean-to, a wall of brush and poles pitched against the wind. You think about using your saddle, your bedroll canvas, even your horse, if it comes down to it. You think about digging into the earth, if the ground is not too frozen, because soil can hold warmth better than air. You have seen men scoop out shallow pits near riverbanks and line them with grass, turning the ground into a womb of stillness. But none of it happens until you stop. And stopping is its own decision. You need a place that will not fill with snow, not flood if temperatures rise, not turn into a wind tunnel. You need to think like a tired engineer. Your horse senses you're slowing. It swings its head slightly, ears twitching. You pat its neck, feeling the bristly winter coat, the steady pulse under skin. The warmth there is comforting, and you are not too proud to admit it. Companionship in the cold is not always about conversation. Sometimes it is just about proximity to another living thing. You angle toward a low rise that breaks the wind. The snow here is thin, the grass poking through, and the ground feels a touch less hostile. You dismount, boots crunching. The cold presses in the second your body stops generating travel heat. Your ears pick up little sounds you ignored while moving. A far coyote yip, the shifting of your horse's weight, your own breath. You stand there for a moment, letting silence settle. This is the threshold moment. The West does not care what you intend. It only cares what you do next. And as you start to untie your bedroll and scan the dark for brush and poles, you are stepping into a long tradition of cowboy winter wisdom. Not the kind taught in schools, but the kind built one shelter at a time, one desperate night after another. You bend to gather your first armful of dry sage and cedar, and the smell rises sweet and resinous even in the cold. Your fingers sting, but you keep moving, because warmth tonight is not going to arrive by itself. You are going to build it. One choice, one wall, one little pocket of human stubbornness against the freezing dark. The brush in your arms crackles softly as you haul it toward the spot you chose. The wind nudges at your hat brim like a nosy stranger, testing whether you meant it when you said you were stopping here. You glance up at the hills again, then down at the ground. It is a simple scan, but your whole future is in it. You are learning to measure cold, not in degrees, but in outcomes. How long can fingers tie knots before they go numb? How fast does sweat chill on your back? How quickly does the night drain a body if there is no shelter to slow it down? To understand why cowboys got so good at building warm shelters, you have to understand what brutal cold really meant in their world. This is not just a poetic winter. It is not the kind you see through a window while holding a mug you paid $5 for. The Old West could swing from warm afternoons to murderous nights with almost no warning. especially on the high plains and in the mountain basins. One afternoon, it is dust and sunlight. By midnight, it is a hard, starry freeze that seems to make even your thoughts brittle. You might be picturing snow everywhere, but the West does winter in a lot of accents. In the northern plains, you get blizzards that come in like stampeding white horses, wind screaming, snow filling every fold of your clothes, visibility dropping to the length of your own arm. In the Rockies, storms can trap you in valleys for days, piling drifts against cabin doors. In the deserts of New Mexico or Arizona, the cold is sneaky. The days feel gentle, even warm, and then the sun falls away and the temperature drops like a stone into a dry well. You can freeze in a place that looked like summer at noon. One mainstream historical fact worth carrying in your saddlebag is that the late 19th century saw several catastrophic winters across the cattle regions, and the most famous is the winter of 1886 to 1887 on the northern range. Ranchers called it the Great Die-Up. Snow fell early and deep, then Chinook winds crusted it into ice, and cattle could not reach grass. By spring, millions of animals were dead, and the open range system started to break apart as ranchers shifted toward fencing and feeding. That winter was not just a bad season, it was a turning point. It also meant that cowboys who rode those ranges learned shelter as a survival skill, not a hobby. If your whole job depends on staying alive long enough to pull cattle through a storm, you learn to make warmth out of nothing. So when you hear the word brutal, think of nights where the wind does not just chill you, it rearranges your sense of time. The gusts hit your face, and you feel your skin tighten. Your nose runs, then starts to dry and sting. Your hands are always one mistake away from losing their grip. Even breathing feels like work. The air cuts in clean slices, filling your lungs with a cold so sharp it feels like it has edges. You start breathing through fabric, not because it helps much, but because you need to soften the bite a little. And you are never dealing with cold alone. The West adds wind to it. The high plains are famous for their openness. And openness means the wind has a long runway to build speed. A calm night can turn into a gale before you finish cussing at your frozen laces. Wind is what makes a modest freeze into a crisis. It steals the heat right off you. It gets inside your coat seams. It turns every bare patch of skin into an emergency. You keep stacking brush while thinking about this, and your mind drifts through places you have been or heard about. The Texas Panhandle has winters where the northers roar down and ice the creeks. Wyoming can hit sub-zero temperatures that last for days. Montana sees snow so powdery it looks innocent until it buries your path. Kansas and Nebraska can have sleet storms that coat everything in a glassy armor. Even California's high country can lay a cold trap for riders who thought they were safe because the day was sunny. Your world is stitched together by these pockets of threat. There is a funny little detail from cold range life that does not show up in a lot of glossy histories. Cowboys sometimes carried small lengths of twine or rawhide, not just for gear repairs but to tie around their ears or under their chins on bitter nights. It was a way to keep a hat secure and keep ears from freezing too fast. Imagine that for a moment. A grown rider, tough as a boot heel, wrapping his head like a parcel because he knows the wind is not playing. It is both ridiculous and deeply sensible, and it tells you something important. Survival out here is not about looking cool, it is about staying functional. You have probably also heard of cowboys greasing their faces in winter. Some used tallow, some used lanolin from sheep wool, some used whatever salve was handy. The idea was to slow the windburn and keep a little moisture barrier between skin and air. It was not a miracle, but it helped. You see that kind of improvisation everywhere. The weather forces you to be your own pharmacist, your own architect, your own meteorologist. If your skin cracks, it can bleed, and if it bleeds in the cold, it can freeze. Everything is connected. Historians still argue whether the West was, on balance, a land of climate extremes that shaped culture more than any other factor, or whether people adapted quickly enough that weather became more background than driver. You can feel the answer in your own hands right now. When the cold makes shelter the difference between sleep and disaster, climate is not a background character, it is sitting right in the saddle with you. And because climate could vary so wildly, cowboys had to pack multiple mental maps. They learned to expect a freeze after a warm day. They learned that river valleys feel gentler at first but can trap cold air like a bowl. They learned that ridges can be clear of snow but hammered by wind. They watched animals for clues. If cattle bunch up early, a front might be looming. If birds dip low, The air pressure is shifting. It is a living science, passed hand to hand. You pause to rub your fingers against your coat, trying to wake them up. You can smell your own sweat in the wool, a faint, salty tang. Sweat is dangerous now. It is warmth leaving you. Cowboys learn to pace themselves in the cold. Strip a layer when working hard. Add it before stopping. It feels counterintuitive if you grew up thinking more clothing is always better. But if you sweat while hauling wood or digging a shallow shelter, that moisture will turn into an ice pack against your skin the moment you stop moving. Your body becomes its own enemy if you are careless. You look at your horse again. Its coat is fluffed, a little haloed with frost. The animal is built for this better than you are, but not infinitely better. Horses can get chilled, especially if they are wet. Cowboys knew to keep a horse from sweating too much during winter travel, because a soaked horse could become weak or even die if left in wind. A rider's survival is tied to the animal's survival. If the horse goes down, you are walking, and walking in a blizzard is not a long-term plan. So brutal cold is not just about discomfort, it is about a chain reaction. Cold makes you slow, slow makes you make mistakes. Mistakes make you wet, lost, or injured. Those things make cold win. Every winter shelter a cowboy built was a way to break that chain, to buy hours and keep the body from sliding down that quiet slope into hypothermia. The night is deepening now. Your collected brush is piled where the wind is least nasty. You can feel that even without thinking about it. Your body reads the draft on your neck. You can hear the wind over there, stronger, and here, a little muted. This is what the land gives you if you pay attention. And as you prepare to build something more solid, you also hold another truth. Cowboys were not always alone. Sometimes there were line camps, bunkhouses, ranch kitchens with pot-bellied stoves. Sometimes a storm caught a whole crew out on a drive, and warmth was a communal project. But whether you were solo or surrounded, the cold set the terms. It made everyone equal in a way. The greenest kid and the oldest hand both respected the same wind. You kneel and start arranging thicker branches for a backbone, and the act of building feels calming. There is a rhythm to it. Gather, place, test. The cold is still there, but now you are doing something that answers it. You are translating climate into craft. That is what the Old West demanded from its cowboys. Not just bravery, but the steady ability to make a small warm pocket inside a very large, very indifferent night. You keep working in the thin light of moon and stars, and the land starts to feel less like a huge empty thing and more like a set of quiet instructions. The first rule in winter is not, be tough. The first rule is, read the land. Because out here, the earth is not passive. It is a partner that either helps you or ignores you, and what it does depends on whether you notice its moods. Before you place a single pole, you stand still and let your face turn slowly, like a sleepy compass. The wind is coming from the northwest tonight. You feel it on your left cheek, and you hear it rising and falling through the grass. Somewhere higher up the slope, it runs harder, but down here, it breaks just a little. That tells you the rise behind you is already doing some work. You want more of that. A shelter without a windbreak is basically a decorative failure. Cowboys learned this lesson early, and you are inheriting it now. People who rode for a living in the 19th century became sharp students of topography. Not the fancy map kind, the hand and eye kind. The kind where you can glance at a shallow depression and know it will hold cold air like water in a bowl. The kind where you can see a line of trees and feel, in your bones, that they are standing there because this spot has a little moisture and therefore a little life. Life tends to mean shelter, fuel, and a chance. You walk a few paces, testing the ground with your boot. It is firm, not boggy, which matters. If you camp on damp soil, that moisture will seep into your bedding and then into you, the way cold fingers slip into a glove. Dry ground is warmth. At least, it is not extra cold. You choose a patch where last year's grass is flattened in a rough oval, maybe from deer bedding down. Animals are good teachers. If a deer thought this was a decent place to hide from wind, you can respect the recommendation. There is something else you are watching for. The sky, the hills, the line of clouds down low. Winter weather can arrive like a rumor that suddenly becomes a fact. One moment, the stars are crisp. The next, there is a milky haze, and the wind shifts, and your horse starts acting like it heard a story you haven't yet. You are looking for routes of escape, as much as for comfort. If a blizzard rolls in, you want to be able to get up and move without arguing with your own campsite. Documents from ranches and army outposts tell us that frontier people routinely used natural features for winter survival, picking camps behind ridges and in the lee of timber stands to cut wind chill. Soldiers on patrol and cowboys on range both wrote about finding a pocket out of the wind before stopping. The language changes, the need doesn't. Wind can triple the misery of a cold night, and blocking it can make a thin blanket feel almost generous. You find that pocket now. It is a shallow draw, not deep enough to turn into a snow trap, but low enough that the ridge shoulders the worst of the gusts. You can hear the wind above you, a rough hiss, and here, in the draw, it becomes more of a whisper. Your body relaxes a fraction. You feel it in your shoulders. That tiny relaxation is the land saying yes. A side story the old hands like to tell goes like this. A green kid once picked a camp on top of a rise because he wanted to see the whole range. Wide view, he said, like a lookout. The older cowboy didn't argue. He just waited. At midnight, when the wind hit like a freight train and the kid's fire kept blowing out, the older man offered to trade spots. The kid ended up shivering behind a wagon wheel down in a gully. In the morning, he said he learned more from that one night than from a month of talk. The West teaches with weather. It is a strict curriculum. You also think about water. It is tempting to camp near a creek because you might want a drink, or because trees cluster there. But winter creeks can be tricky. Cold air sinks into valleys, so the low spots can be 10 degrees colder than the ridges. And if the creek rises or ice breaks, you do not want surprise wetness. Wetness is a kind of quiet betrayal, so you stay close enough to benefit from trees, but not so close that you sleep in a refrigerator. You bring your brush pile down into the drawer. The smell of sage is stronger here, and when you crush a stem, it releases that clean, peppery scent that almost feels warm just because it is familiar. Familiarity is its own comfort when you are tired. Your horse follows, blowing softly, and you tie it where it can nose at a little grass without wandering too far. You do not want to wake up to hoofprints fading into the dark. Another winter rule. Do not lose your ride when the cold is already trying to take everything else. Now, your brain is doing geometry. Simple geometry, the kind learned by hands, not chalk. You need your shelter opening aimed away from the wind. You need a back wall angled to shed gusts upward rather than catching them. If you build a lean-to, the slope should face leeward, and the base should be anchored so the wind cannot peel it open like a sardine tin. If you dig a shallow pit, you want the lip on the wind side higher. Everything is about controlling air. Air moving is cold. Air still is survivable. You begin to lay down thicker branches for a spine, leaning them against the slope. The ground helps you again here. Using the hill as part of your structure is like getting a free wall. Cowboys use that trick all the time. It saved time and saved calories. Winter is a season where calories are currency. You can spend them building, or you can spend them shivering, but you are going to spend them either way. Better to invest. There is a quiet argument among researchers about how much of cowboy survival knowledge was learned on the job versus borrowed from other frontier groups, like trappers, indigenous guides, or soldiers. Some say the cowboy's world was mostly ranch-born, a craft passed from foreman to hand. Others point out that the West was a big mixing bowl of cultures, and shelter techniques moved across it like stories around a fire. You do not need to pick a side tonight. You can feel both truths at once. You are using whatever works. You are a student of results. You pause and listen again. The wind is steady, but there is a faint change in its texture. A little more bite, a little more speed. Your draw might be even more precious if the night gets worse. Good choice, you think, and for a second you feel proud. Not loud pride, just the gentle pride of someone making sensible decisions under pressure. As you work, you notice the shapes around you. The draw curves like a shallow spoon. The ridge above is dotted with scrub juniper, their dark silhouettes hunched against the sky. Those shrubs are there because their roots can handle this soil, and because the ridge is dry. Dry ridges mean less ice underfoot, less chance of waking in a puddle. The moonlight makes every blade of grass look silver, and the frost on your bedroll canvas seems to glow. You gather more brush, taking only what is dead and dry. You know not to tear living willow or cottonwood if you can avoid it. Living wood smokes and wastes your effort. Dead wood snaps clean. A good sign. You also keep an eye on the way snow is drifting. The wind has piled it in a soft crescent on the north side of a boulder. That tells you how air is flowing. If you build on the wrong side, you will wake up inside a snow dune, which is funny only if you live long enough to tell it. Down in the drawer, the world feels smaller. That is part of its comfort. A big, open night can make you feel exposed, like you are sleeping in the middle of an empty stadium, but in a good pocket, you feel tucked in. This psychological warmth matters more than you think. When fear sneaks in, it makes cold feel colder. When you feel secure, your body stops wasting energy on panic. You take your coat off for a moment while building, but not all the way. You loosen it. You learn to avoid sweating. The cold is still there, but you are moving with a steady rhythm now, and your breath is warmer in your scarf. You can taste the dryness in your mouth, like old paper. You drink from your canteen, the water shockingly cold, then tighten the cap quickly. Even water can freeze on a night like this. Finally, you step back to look at your setup. It is not finished yet. It is just a beginning, but the pieces are aligned with the land, not against it. That is the real first rule. The West will swallow your shelter if you fight it. It will help shelter you if you cooperate. You kneel to wedge the bottom branches into the soil, and your fingers sting hard enough to make you hiss. You blow on them, then keep going. The night is not waiting. Yet you are no longer a traveler stuck in cold. You are a builder shaping a corner of comfort. And you can feel, even before the walls are up, the way this pocket will hold heat better than any random spot on the prairie. You settle the last thick pole into place and let out a slow breath. The wind above the ridge keeps talking to itself, but down here it is already quieter. You tilt your head, listening to that difference the way you would listen to a friend, lowering their voice to help you sleep. The land is on your side now, because you bothered to read it. You do not have much daylight left in your imagination, even if the moon is bright. The West teaches you to build fast when the cold is sharpening its teeth. You have your pocket in the drawer, your spine of branches leaning into the slope, and now comes the part Cowboys got famous for, without anyone ever putting it on a poster. You are going to make a lean-to before the night turns from chilly to cruel. A lean-to is simple, almost embarrassingly simple. One slanted wall, a low roof, a mouth that faces away from the wind, but the simplicity is deceptive. Done right, it can mean the difference between waking up stiff and grey or waking up annoyed but alive. You stand in front of your skeleton of poles and think about the angle. Too steep, and the wind will slip under it. Too shallow, and snow will pile on top and collapse it. You want a gentle slope that lets gusts slide over like water over a rock. You start layering brush, the thickest stuff at the bottom for strength, the finer stuff on top for insulation. The sound is crisp, twigs snapping, needles scuffing, the quiet scrape of wood on wood. Your hands move quickly, almost on their own, because you have watched others do this 100 times. You wedge sage, cedar, maybe a little cottonwood if you found any, into the frame. You are making a wall of trapped air. The warmth you will create later, from your body or from a fire, will need those air pockets to linger. Solid wood alone does not insulate well. It is the stillness between things that holds heat. Cowboys on trail drives used lean-tos constantly, because they had to carry their world with them. On the long cattle drives north from Texas to Kansas or Wyoming, there were no cabins waiting every night. When winter weather surprised them, a quick shelter was part of the job. Diaries from some drives mention riders gathering brush for a windbreak, or throwing up a shelter against the bank when a norther blew in. It is one of those practical details that shows up quietly in the record. Not heroic, not romantic, just necessary. You stack faster, your breath fogs, and the moisture freezes as a rime on your scarf. You keep reminding yourself not to sweat. Every few minutes you slow, take a deeper breath, let your heart come down from the building heat. It is a strange dance. Work hard enough to finish before your fingers quit on you, but not so hard that your back turns damp. You can feel that line in your body now, the way a seasoned hand feels a horse, sensing when it is about to bolt. You stay just on the safe side. As your lean-to gains shape, you look for extra help from the land. You pull a fallen log to one side to act as a short wing wall, blocking the wind that might curl around the shelter's edge. Cowboys called these wind jammers sometimes, and even a crude wing could reduce drafts inside. You also stamp down the snow where you will sleep, not because you like hard ground, but because fluffy snow melts under you and then refreezes into an icy cradle. You want a firm base, then a thick bed on top. There is a little range trick, half joke and half truth, that some old cowhands used to pass along. If you have time, sprinkle a thin layer of dry grass on the ground before you lay your bedroll. They claimed it keeps spirits from creeping up through the earth and stealing your warmth. That is the story version. The real version is that grass creates another insulating layer and keeps your bedding from touching cold soil directly. Whether you blame spirits or physics, the result is a warmer sleep. You gather armfuls of grass now, the dry stuff that rattles like paper. It smells faintly sweet, like summer trapped in straw. You spread it thick where your shoulders and hips will rest. You are not making a mattress, but you are making a buffer. The ground is an excellent thief of heat. Every cowboy who survived winter knew that. People tend to picture cold as coming from above, from snow and wind, but the earth can suck warmth out of you all night if you let it, so you do not let it. The lean-to roof is next. You drag more brush up the slope of poles, layering it like shingles. You want to overlap each handful, so snow will slide down instead of slipping inside. If you have canvas, you might use it on top, but brush works fine if you do it thick. You check for gaps with your palm. A little draft now is a lot of draft at 3 in the morning. You plug holes by jamming in smaller twigs. It looks crude, but it is a kind of folk architecture. There is still some back and forth among historians about how standardized cowboy shelter methods ever were. One camp argues that because cowboys came from many backgrounds, there was no single cowboy way to build a lean-to, just a bunch of local habits. Another camp points to similar descriptions across different states and insists a shared trail culture created a common toolbox of shelter tricks. You can feel both in your hands. The bones of your lean-to come from things you have seen on this range, yet the idea itself is older and wider than you are. Skills travel with people. You step inside your half-finished shelter to test it. The change is immediate. Not warm exactly, but calmer. The wind's voice drops down to a low murmur. You are out of its direct reach. You crouch and imagine the night ahead. You will be lying with your feet toward the back wall, head near the opening so you can see out if noise wakes you. You do not want to sleep with your face against the back wall because condensation can build there and frost you. Another thing cowboys learn through bitter trial. Your breath is a weather system inside a small shelter. If you trap it wrong, you wake up crusted in ice. You make the opening low. A low opening keeps heat in and makes the shelter less inviting to wind. It also makes you crawl in like a tired animal, which is oddly fitting. The Old West is not a place for standing on ceremony, especially in winter. Now you think about fire placement. If you build a small fire just outside the opening, and you angle the shelter so the back wall reflects heat inward, the lean-to becomes a heat trap. Cowhands use this trick, and if there was snow, they sometimes built a low snow wall on the fire's far side to reflect heat back too. Tonight your snow is thin, so you use brush and a couple of rocks. You are shaping heat like a shepherd shapes a flock. You gather fuel. Not much. Lean-to nights are about small, controlled fires, not bonfires that eat your wood and leave you with nothing at dawn. You pick dead twigs, cedar scraps, maybe a chunk of cottonwood. The smell of cedar on your gloves is earthy and comforting. You spark the fire with flint or a match, and the first flame is a tiny, stubborn orange tongue. It catches, crackles, and immediately your shelter feels different. The air warms in a small breath. The fire makes the night feel less empty. You sit close, hands out, letting the warmth soak into your knuckles. Your horse stands a short distance away, tail flicking, head lowered. It is calm. That matters. If your horse is calm, the world is calm. You keep an eye on it anyway. Predator nights are rare in deep cold, but not impossible. Coyotes and wolves are hungry when snow covers the grass. Still, with a fire, you are less of a target. You look at your shelter again and feel a quiet satisfaction. It is not pretty. It is not a cabin. It is a slanted wall of brush and poles. But it is a real thing you made in under an hour, in dark, with stiff fingers. Cowboys built these at sundown all across the range. They did it when storms rolled in on drives. They did it when line shacks were too far. They did it when they were too tired to ride another mile. It was the frontier version of turning a cold night into something manageable. You add another handful of brush to the roof, because more insulation never hurts. Then you pull your bedroll into place. Canvas down, blankets on top. You shake them out, and a little frost dust rises, glittering in firelight. The smell of wool and smoke mixes, a scent that seems to belong to winter work itself. You slip off your boots only halfway, loosening them, but not removing them entirely. A cowboy trick. If your boots freeze solid overnight, you are in for a miserable morning. So you keep them near the fire, close enough to stay pliable, but not so close they scorch. You crawl into the lean-to feet first. The grass under you is crisp but forgiving. You pull the blankets up and feel your body finally stop arguing with the cold. The fire pops softly, a steady little heartbeat out front. The wind is still out there, but it is now a distant problem. Inside your shelter, the air is still. The night has edges, but you have pushed them back. Your eyes get heavy. You listen to the horse breathing, the occasional creak of saddle leather, the hush of wind over the ridge. Sleep comes to you not because the cold is gone, but because you are no longer helpless against it. You built a wall. You chose the land right. You did what cowboys had to do, again and again, to keep winter from turning a one-night stop into the last night. Morning never feels fully safe in winter, even when you survive the night, because the cold lingers in your joints like an unpaid debt. But you do wake. Your lean-to has held. The fire is a sleepy pile of coals, red at the center, as if it is dreaming. You push your blanket down and sit up slowly, letting blood find your fingers again. Outside, the prairie is pale and stiff. Your horse lifts its head, ears forward, giving you that look of quiet reproach, like it is asking why humans insist on making things so complicated. You stretch, step out, and watch your breath curl. The air is still sharp, though not as biting as the midnight hours. You stamp your boots, loosen your shoulders, and for a minute you just take in how the world looks after cold. Everything seems outlined. Grass is rimmed in white. The draw feels like a bowl of glass. The sky is a clear blue that makes you think of steel. This is the kind of morning that turns a person grateful and a little wiser. You might ride on today, but you can already feel winter waiting for you again tonight, somewhere down the line. And the longer you spend on the range, the more you understand why some cowboys did not rely only on quick shelters. Lean-tos are great for emergencies, but if you are working a winterline camp, watching cattle in a big, lonely pasture for weeks, you need something sturdier, something that does not demand fresh brush every night. That is where the dugout comes in. You have heard of dugouts from older hands, maybe even seen one tucked into a bank. They are not glamorous. They are not the cabins of storybooks, but they are warm in the way the earth is warm. Slow, steady, almost motherly. The idea is simple. You dig into a hillside or a riverbank, making the ground your insulation. In winter, the soil below the surface stays far more stable in temperature than open air. So if you can get your body inside the earth, even partly, you are already halfway to comfort. Frontier records show that dugouts were common across the Great Plains in the mid to late 1800s, not just for homesteaders, but also for ranch-line camps. In places where timber was scarce and winter winds were cruel, people carved small rooms into banks and roofed them with poles, sod, or brush. They were sometimes called soddies, if sod was used on top, but the dugout core was the same. They were cheap, quick, and surprisingly effective. If you want a plain truth about cowboy winter life, here it is. Many ranch hands slept in earth shelters when nothing else was practical. You picture one now. A low doorway set into a hill, maybe framed with rough logs. Inside, a rectangular space dug out with a shovel and a lot of swearing. The walls are soil, sometimes lined with planks if the ranch had spare lumber. The roof is poles laid across the opening, then covered with dirt or sod. The floor might be packed earth, maybe sprinkled with straw. At the back there could be a crude bunk and a tiny stove made from a barrel or a metal box. The whole thing sits half hidden under grass and snow, like a badger's den big enough for a man. You smell it in your mind. Damp soil, smoke that has soaked into dirt, the faint animal scent of hides used as blankets. The air inside is still. No wind gets in unless you invite it. That stillness is the secret. Wind can drop your body temperature fast. A dugout removes wind from the equation almost completely. You ride later that day toward a line camp, one you have used before when the cattle are wintered far from the main ranch. The sun is weak, and the ground crunches as your horse walks. You reach a low bluff of clay and grass, and there it is, a dugout mouth facing south, sheltered from the prevailing north wind. The door is a plank hung on rawhide hinges. It looks like something a beaver built after a hard divorce, yet you feel a tug of relief before you even dismount. You push inside. The change is immediate and almost shocking. The air is cool, sure, but it is not attacking you. It feels like entering a cave. The light dims to amber from a tiny window cut near the roofline, maybe covered with greased paper instead of glass. Your boots thud on packed earth. You see a bunk along one wall, a rough table on the other, and a small stovepipe disappearing through the roof. The place smells like old coffee and smoke. If comfort had a scent in the West, this is part of it. You set down your gear and run your hand along the dirt wall. It is cold to the touch, but not freezing. The earth does not change temperature as quickly as air. Cowboys learn to trust that. A dugout could stay relatively stable, even when the surface world swung wildly. On a night when the wind howled outside, the dugout sat quiet, letting you sleep longer than you could in a lean-to. There is a strange little frontier detail that makes you smile. Some dugouts had a shelf carved right into the wall to keep matches dry, because a ranch hand who let his matches get damp in winter was basically begging for misery. In a few camps, people also kept a small tin of salt hung from a nail, and they would sprinkle a pinch into the stove to make the flame burn brighter for a moment. It was a tiny ritual, half practical and half superstition, like giving the fire a snack to keep it awake. No one wrote a manual for that. It spread through camp talk and cold nights. You sit by the little stove and start a fire. The metal is cold, so cold it almost squeaks, and you have to coax the first flame like a shy animal. When it catches, the dugout comes alive. Heat rises, taps the roof, and spreads sideways along the dirt walls. The walls do not let it escape quickly. They hold it, and then slowly give it back. If you stay in here a few hours, the whole room becomes a warm loaf. You also notice the sound. Everything is muffled. The howl of wind becomes a distant sigh. Hoofbeats outside sound like they are happening in another world. The dugout is a pocket not just of warmth but of quiet. That quiet is a kind of medicine after a day of winter grit. The West can be loud in its emptiness, but here, the earth is padding your ears. Dugouts were not perfect, of course. You can feel the drawbacks, too. If the roof leaks, you get drips on your blanket and a slow creep of dampness. If the bank is unstable, a thaw can cause a collapse, and that risk was real. There are stories of line camps caving in after heavy rain. That is why smart builders chose firm hillsides and packed roofs properly. Still, living in a hole in the ground takes a certain attitude. You have to be okay with dirt in your boots and spiders in the corners. You cannot be precious about your environment. People who study frontier housing disagree on how dugouts were viewed at the time. Some argue they were a temporary embarrassment, used only when settlers or cowboys had no better choice. Others suggest many people preferred them for winter because they were so efficient and required so little wood. You can see how both positions formed. If you are dreaming of a white clapboard house one day, a dugout feels like a stopgap. But if you are freezing and tired right now, a dugout feels like genius. You lie on the bunk and pull a blanket over you. The earth's warmth is slow, like a big animal breathing. You can feel it under your back. The stove ticks softly as it heats. You hear faint life outside, cattle shifting in snow, your horse pawing the ground. But the cold is no longer in the room with you. It is outside, forced to knock politely on a door. In the evening, when the sun drops and the air sharpens again, you are grateful for this kind of shelter. You eat beans warmed on the stovetop, drink coffee that tastes like smoke and comfort, and let your boots dry beside the fire. You make a mental note of the dugout's small design secrets. The low ceiling keeps heat close. The south-facing door catches what little sun there is. The thick roof blocks wind and traps an air layer above you. Nothing about it is accidental. Every choice is winter thinking. You watch the flame settle into a steady glow, and you realize something else about dugouts. They are a compromise between moving and staying. Cowboys on long drives could not dig one every night, but cowboys assigned to winter pastures could. Ranches that cared about keeping hands alive and functional sometimes ordered dugouts built in advance, like little safety stations on the range. It was not charity, it was practical economics. A dead or frost-bitten cowboy could not herd cattle. So winter shelters became part of ranch management, even if no one advertised it. You close your eyes as the warmth deepens. The dugout is humble, but it is a friend. It is the earth letting you borrow its steadiness for a night. And as you drift towards sleep, you understand why men who spent their lives under wide skies were willing, in winter, to crawl into the ground. Not because they were afraid, but because they were wise enough to accept help from whatever the West offered. You wake in the dugout to a kind of thick, patient quiet. The stove has burned down to ash, but the room is still holding a gentle warmth, like the earth refuses to let the cold rush in all at once. You sit up slowly, rubbing your eyes, and for a moment you forget you are half underground. Then you smell the soil, that faint mineral scent, and you remember. Outside, winter is still sitting on the prairie like a heavy coat, waiting for you to step back into it. You push open the door. The light that comes in is pale and low, the sun barely climbing. Your breath turns white instantly. The cattle in the distance look like dark stones scattered on a white cloth. Your horse is there, patient, its back dusted with frost, head down in the sparse grass. You take a second to feel thankful for the dugout, then you go about your morning like any working cowboy would. Shake out your blankets, toss the ashes out, pack your gear. Winter is never sentimental for long. And as you move through the day, you notice the land changing. You ride into a stretch of open prairie where trees are rare and the soil is thick with tough, matted grass. This is a country that does not give you logs easily. It is a place where the sky is huge and wood is something you dream about. You already know what that means for shelter. If you cannot build with timber, you build with what grows at your feet. That is how sod houses come into your story, and not just for homesteaders. Cowboys, line riders, and range crews learned the prairie math too. Sod is not glamorous either, but it is everywhere in grassland country, and in winter, it works like a slow heater. You slice it out in blocks, stack it like bricks, and let the roots and soil make a thick wall that wind cannot bully. When you do it right, the walls are so dense that even a hard norther feels muted on the inside. There are plenty of accounts from the Great Plains in the 1870s and 1880s, describing sod structures as the default mode of building where lumber was scarce. People called them soddies, and entire ranch outposts were sometimes built this way. The mainstream record agrees on this. In places like Nebraska, Kansas, and the Dakotas, sod was a major building material because the prairie had more grass than trees, and freighted lumber was expensive. If a ranch wanted an outlying bunkhouse or a winterline camp, sod was often the quickest path to something livable. You stop near one such place late afternoon, a low sod shelter set against a slight rise. From a distance it looks like a hill that got tired and decided to stay put. Up close you see the squared edges of the sod blocks, stacked in tight courses like greenish-brown bricks. The roof is a lattice of poles covered with sod again, making the whole place a thick, breathing sandwich of earth and grass. Snow sits on top like frosting. The door is low, because heat rises, and you do not want to give it a tall escape route. You duck in, and the inside smells different from the dugout. Less damp, more grassy, like hay stored in a barn. The walls feel soft to the eye, not polished, but they hold warmth in a muffled way. The wind outside can throw itself at these walls all night and barely make the flame of a candle tremble. You run your palm against a sod block and feel faint plant fibers, roots still knitted through the soil. That root web is the secret strength. It keeps the block from crumbling and adds a little insulation, like nature built its own wallboard. Sod shelters also have a kind of soundscape you might not expect. The thick walls swallow noise. Even your bootsteps land quietly on the packed floor. You can still hear cattle lowing far off, but it comes to you softened, like a memory instead of a threat. That quiet makes sleep easier. When the world is too loud, your mind stays alert. When it is muted, your body remembers. It is allowed to rest. There is a prairie quirk that cowboys used to tease each other about. Some swore that if you lay your ear against a sod wall at night, you could hear the roots drinking or the earth talking. Most of that is campfire nonsense, but there is a grain of truth hiding inside the joke. Sod walls can shift slightly with moisture and temperature, and in deep cold, they sometimes make little popping sounds, the way frozen ground cracks. If you are half asleep and listening hard, it can feel like the building is whispering. Out here, even a wall can get a personality by January. You also learn quickly that sod is not only about stacking blocks, it is about choosing the right soil. Clay, heavy sod holds together like a loaf of bread. Sandy sod crumbles like a bad cookie. So builders looked for patches of dense prairie turf with thick roots, often along swales where grass grew richer. They cut blocks with spades, sometimes as big as a suitcase, and laid them grass side down so the roots laced into the soil above. Then they staggered the seams, just like bricks, to keep wind from finding a straight crack into the house. Sod shelters were warm, but they came with their own winter rituals. You had to keep the roof from leaking. If a thaw came, and then a freeze, water could seep through and turn to ice inside. Cowboys and settlers alike would patch roofs with extra sod or smear a mix of mud and straw into cracks. It was messy work. Your gloves got filthy. But in prairie country, mud was basically your building putty. And yes, there is always a stove story. Many sod bunkhouses had little pot-bellied stoves, and the stovepipe was a weak point because any gap around it could let heat out and snow in. So people stuffed the pipe collar with wet clay that hardened into a seal. You can still find old photos of sod roofs with a pipe poking out like a black reed in a field. Those stoves were small, but the walls did half the job for them. That meant less fuel burned, which mattered a lot when fuel was scarce. People who study frontier architecture do not completely agree on how long sod shelters stayed in use for cowboy operations. Some argue they were a brief phase, replaced quickly by lumber cabins once railroads made wood cheaper. Others say sod bunkhouses and line camps persisted for decades in remote ranch areas because they were too practical to abandon. Standing in this one, feeling the way it holds warmth even after the stove dies, you can see why the second view has teeth. Convenience is hard to beat when winter is pressing down. You sit on a rough bench inside and eat a cold biscuit, letting the shelter's stillness settle into you. Outside, the wind is building again. You can tell by the way snow swirls along the ground in thin snakes. But inside, it is calm. The walls are thick enough to make you forget the scale of the prairie for a while. It is like being hugged by the land itself. You also notice how sod changes the feel of light. The small window, maybe just a square opening with cloth or greased paper, lets in a yellowish glow. The earth tones of the walls reflect it softly. Nothing is harsh. Even the shadows feel sleepy. In a way, these shelters were made for winter minds. They do not just stop cold. They slow down time. After you rest, you go outside to check the cattle. The air bites at your face again. You are reminded that this warmth is an earned thing, built block by people who had no other choice. Cowboys in these regions learned to cut sod fast, to read where the turf was thick enough, to set a shelter into a rise, so the north wind slid over the roof instead of slamming into the door. They learned to treat the prairie like a storehouse of materials. Grass was not only feed for cattle, it was walls, roofs, and survival. As dusk comes, you drift back inside, add a few dried chips to the stove, and watch the flame catch. The smell of burning grass and wood drifts up the pipe. The shelter takes that heat and holds it, steady as a hand on your shoulder. You roll out your bed on the floor, thicker now, because you know the ground is still cold, even when the air feels nice. You settle in and let your body soften. You think about all the versions of shelter you have already relied on this winter. Brush walls, earth pits, dugouts, and now sod. Each one is a reply to the same problem, shaped by what the land allows. In timber country you build with logs. In grass country you build with grass. That is the cowboy lesson hidden beneath the folklore. Survival is not one trick. It is a toolbox, and you use whatever is in reach. The stove murmurs. The wind slides over your roof without finding a way inside. Your eyes feel heavy again, and as you drift towards sleep, you understand why people who lived on treeless plains did not see sod houses as desperate. They saw them as smart, warm, and wonderfully available. The prairie can be brutal, yes, but it can also be generous, if you know how to ask. You wake again to that half-light that winter loves, the kind that makes the world look like a faded photograph. The sod shelter did its job, but you still feel the cold waiting just outside the door, like a creditor tapping a boot. You roll your shoulders, breathe in the grassy scent of the walls, and step into the morning. Today you ride toward foothills where the prairie begins to wrinkle into timber country. The land shifts slowly, almost politely. First you see scattered cottonwoods in the draws, then denser stands of pine higher up, then, finally, actual forest. The air smells different here. More resin, less dust, and with trees come a new kind of possibility. Logs. Cowboys did not invent cabins, obviously. People had been stacking logs into shelter for as long as humans could lift wood. But as ranching spread into wooded valleys and mountain edges, cowhands learned to throw up basic cabins of their own, borrowing methods from trappers, miners, and settler families. The old records are clear on this point. In the wooded parts of the West, a lot of line camps and remote ranch outposts were simple log structures, built quickly, and meant to last a few seasons or more. It was not luxury, it was infrastructure. You ride into a narrow valley where a creek runs under thin ice, and you see one of these places ahead. A cabin, squat and dark against snow, smoke rising from a pipe. It looks like a toy until you get closer and realize the logs are thick as barrels. The roof is low, with a heavy pitch to shed snow. The door is simple planks, swollen from moisture, but it closes. And the walls, those walls are everything. Wood is a better insulator than sod in some ways, and a log cabin that is well chinked can stand up to a mountain night that would shred a brush lean-to. You dismount and push inside, and the smell hits you first. Smoke, pine sap, damp wool, a little bit of old meat fat near the stove. It is a smell that clings to your coat. You will carry it for days. The room is small, one main space with a bunk, a rough table scarred by knives, maybe a couple of nail pegs holding spare reins. Nothing fancy, but you can already feel how the cabin changes the cold. The air is still, like in the dugout, but it is drier, not so earthy. The wind outside can shout all it wants. In here, it sounds like it is talking through a closed fist. Log cabins in cowboy country were often built with whatever trees were close, usually pine, spruce, cottonwood, or even juniper, if that was what the land offered. The craft was straightforward. Fell the trees, trim branches, stack them with notches so they lock at corners. Then fill the gaps between logs, which is called chinking, with a mix of mud, straw, moss, or even rags. If you skip that step, every crack becomes a little winter mouth, breathing cold into the room all night. Cowboys learned to hate drafts like they hated rattlesnakes, so they chinked hard. You run your fingers along a seam. The mud is cracked a bit. You make a mental note to patch it before night. A cabin is only as warm as its least cared-for gap. You have seen line shacks that felt colder inside than outside because their walls were careless and their doors hung crooked. Warmth is not automatic. Even in a cabin, you keep working. There is a small, almost silly cabin tradition some cowhands followed. If a crew built a new line shack, they would sometimes carve their initials or a quick doodle into a log near the door. Nothing dramatic, just a scratch of identity. Some did it for pride, some for luck, some because they wanted the next hand to know who built the place. You can imagine a winter night, the builder's hands numb, scratching a little mark while the stove warms up, like saying, "I was here, and I lived through this." The West left fingerprints wherever it could. You light the stove and feel the cabin wake. The iron ticks and pings as it heats. The flame turns from nervous to steady. You hang your gloves near the pipe so they dry without burning. You drag your boots closer to the hearth. Not too close, because leather can go brittle if overheated. You're doing 100 little things automatically now. The small choreography of winter shelter. Cowboys did this without calling it choreography. They just called it staying alive. Outside, the light fades early in winter, especially in valleys where hills steal the horizon. You can feel the temperature slipping as the sun drops behind the ridge. The creek sounds tighter, like ice is pulling a zipper across it. You step out to gather extra wood, because a cabin without fuel is just a box for freezing. You choose deadfall, stand close to the stove long enough to warm your hands, and bring the next armload in. This is the winter rhythm. Heat, gather. Heat, gather. In this kind of country, log cabins were the best of several worlds. They were warmer than lean-tos, less damp than dugouts, more durable than sod when forests were nearby, and they offered a social center. If two riders crossed paths in a storm, the cabin was where they met, traded news, and pretended they were not grateful for company. Some remote line shacks became little nodes of connection on huge ranches. On paper, they were tools. In real life, they were lifelines. A number of ranch letters and journals mention line riders wintering in cabins for weeks, especially in the mountain states, where cattle were kept in sheltered basins. The writers talk about feeding hay, breaking ice on water troughs, and retreating to the shack when snow hit. It is a reminder that the cowboy's winter job was not only about riding, it was about tending and waiting. Shelter made that waiting possible. You eat a simple supper inside, beans again, maybe salt, pork, the smell filling the room and mixing with smoke. You drink coffee that is black enough to make your eyes water. You listen to the wind climbing the ridge outside, but in here, it is only a dull roar. You think about how different this feels from last week on the open prairie. Out there, shelter was something you built new every night. Here, shelter is a place, a saved effort. You start to understand why some cowboys preferred winter work in timber country. It is not easier, exactly, but it is steadier. Still, cabins had their own troubles. Mice, for one. They loved the warmth, and they loved the grain sacks or crumbs you left. You have woken up to the faint scratch of tiny feet, and there is something humiliating about chasing a mouse with frozen fingers. Another trouble is smoke. If the stovepipe is clogged with soot or snow, the cabin fills with a bitter haze. Then you are coughing in the dark and trying to clear a pipe with a stick. Not fun. Yet even those annoyances are better than sleeping in raw wind. There is also a lively disagreement among scholars about who actually built most of these line shacks. Some say ranch owners hired carpenters or had crews build them in organized spurts. Others argue that cowboys themselves did much of the building during slow seasons, using basic skills and local materials. The evidence points both ways. Wealthier outfits often planned their shacks. Poorer or more remote ranges relied on whoever was there with an axe. Either way, the cabin's existence proves a larger truth. The cowboy world did not float entirely on improvisation. Over time, it invested in winter security. You patch the cracked chinking before bed, smearing fresh mud into the seam with your glove. The mud is cold and gritty, but you know it will harden by morning. You close the door and check the latch. You sweep snow away from the threshold so it will not melt into a puddle and refreeze your boots in place. You are not being fussy. You are being wise. When you finally lie down on the bunk, the cabin holds you in a dry, smoky warmth. The logs creak softly as they cool, a sound like old bones settling. The wind continues its night patrol outside, but it cannot get grip on you here. And as your eyes close, you feel that deep cowboy gratitude for solid walls. You think back to the brush, lean-to, the dugout, the sod house. Each was a response to the same winter. But the cabin feels like a promise that the West can be shaped, not just endured. It is still rough, still plain, still a place where you sleep in your clothes because mornings are too cold for vanity, yet it is home for now, however temporary. The stove's glow fades to a steady red. Your breath slows. You let the warmth settle into your muscles, and you drift off listening to the soft, safe hush of timber country keeping winter at arm's length. Dawn brushes the cabin window with a thin, silvery light, the kind that looks cold even before you step outside to confirm it. You pull your coat tight, open the door, and the air immediately bites your skin. The cold has teeth again, sharp ones. You can smell snow coming, that faint metal scent that rides ahead of a storm. And you know right away that today will teach you a different winter lesson. Not every shelter depends on walls. Sometimes survival depends on fuel, specifically fire. Out here, heat is not something you take for granted. A fire is warmth, light, cooking, morale, and protection all at once. But in many parts of cowboy country, especially on the open plains, wood is as rare as luxury cloth. You cannot burn what does not exist, so you learn to burn what the land allows, even if it is not what you would ever dream of tossing into a hearth back east. You step away from the cabin now, taking your horse down into a brushy draw where scattered cottonwoods stand, their leaves long gone. Cottonwood is decent fuel when it is dry, though not as hot-burning as oak or hickory. Cowboys learned quickly which woods popped embers dangerously and which smoked too much. Pine burns fast and smells wonderful, but it can spit sparks into your bedding if you are careless. Juniper burns hot and steady, a godsend on freezing nights. Cottonwood will do when you have nothing better. But the truth of the open range is this: very often, you do have nothing better. That is when cowboys turn to an unlikely friend: dry buffalo chips. You crouch in the cold and pick one up now. Light, crumbly, brown like sun-baked clay. It does not smell bad, at least not when it is dry, because a dried chip is mostly grass compressed by a massive animal with a simple digestive system. For generations, the Plains tribes had used buffalo chips as fuel, and cowboys learned the same habit, both by necessity and by observation. People joke about it now, but on the frontier, chips were the difference between a warm night and frostbite. Many accounts from the 1800s mention that buffalo chips burn with a clear, steady flame, surprisingly good for cooking, and they do not make a fire roar dangerously high. That matters when you are heating a lean-to or a sod shelter that could catch sparks. It is a clean, polite little fire. Cowboys sometimes half laughed as they gathered chips, calling them prairie coal or brown gold, but they used them constantly. When the bison herds were still plentiful, you could pick up enough in 5 minutes to cook supper and warm your hands. You gather what you can now. The prairie wind has dried them perfectly. They crumble slightly under your gloves. You also look for driftwood along the frozen creek. Anything that has not rotted completely can help you build a core of heat. You are thinking like a person whose life depends on calories of fire. There is an odd, endearing detail from winter camps that you recall. Some cowboys swore that buffalo chip fires worked best if you split the chips into smaller pieces and mixed them with a handful of twigs. almost like making a stew of fuel. The twigs catch the flame quickly, and the chips keep it steady. It is improvised science, the kind taught by cold nights and burned fingers. You do not question it, you just do it. You also know something else. Winter fire is not only about fuel, it is about placement. A fire placed in the wrong spot can let the wind steal all its heat before it reaches your shelter. So you choose a shallow hollow on the leeward side of a boulder. The stone acts as a reflector. You can almost picture the heat bouncing off it and into you later, when you sit with your bedroll over your knees. Cowboys often used rocks, saddles, even tightly packed snow walls to trap and direct heat. Winter fire is shaped, not simply burned. Another winter truth rises in your memory. Wet fuel is a disaster, even damp fuel. It hisses, smokes, and refuses to warm you. Cowboys on long rides often carried a few dry chips in their saddlebag, just in case they landed somewhere barren of decent material. It was not glamorous, but neither is freezing. The land forces you to plan ahead whether you consider yourself a planner or not. By midday, the wind begins to sharpen again. That tells you the coming storm might arrive by dusk. You make mental notes, the way riders always did. Where is the nearest wood stand? Where are the drifts building? What will fuel look like tomorrow morning if snow buries everything? Winter is a kind of chess game. You think 2 moves ahead, or you lose. There are also stories from the trail that riders shared about emergency fuel sources. One of the strangest involves burning dried sage roots. When you cannot find anything else above ground, sometimes the roots underground stay dry enough to use. Cowboys would dig around a dead sagebrush stump, pull up the dense root mass, and break it apart. It burns hot and fast, enough to warm a cup of coffee or toast a piece of bread. It is one of those details you would never imagine unless you have lived hungry through a winter night. Another odd one. Some cowhands swore that pine knots collected from old stumps made the best fire starter in the mountains. The resin inside them burns like slow lightning and can coax a weak fire into strength. These knots were prized finds. Men carried them wrapped in cloth, like little nuggets of winter luck. And if you ever hear a cowboy brag about lighting a fire in a sleet storm with one match, pine knots are probably the reason the story is true. As the light drops, you head back to your cabin with your arms full of fuel. The wind has turned icy, sliding under your collar like a cold whisper. A storm front is definitely on the move. Your horse shakes its mane and snorts, as if agreeing. Animals sense these things earlier than humans. You trust that. Inside the cabin, you build your fire carefully. Twigs first, then chips, then a thicker piece of wood once the flame is steady. The warmth spreads slowly, like molasses climbing uphill. You sit beside the stove and hold your hands close, feeling your skin wake up. The burn of thawing fingers is unpleasant but comforting in its own way. Pain means circulation. Circulation means survival. As the shelter warms, you remember something researchers still discuss: the degree to which cowboy fire habits varied across regions. Some scholars argue that northern plains riders relied heavily on chip fires because trees were scarcer. Others argue that mountaineer cowboys in Wyoming and Montana used mostly wood and considered chips a last resort. The truth, as always in frontier stories, likely lies in a wide range of personal habits, shaped by local land. Firecraft was not standardized. It was learned one hard night at a time. You sip hot coffee now, letting warmth spread from your chest outward. You stare at the flames through the stove grate. They dance low, steady, loyal. Fire in winter has a personality. It feels like a companion when you're alone. Cowboys wrote poems about their fires, sang songs beside them, and shared stories that lasted longer than the fuel. The lean-to, the dugout, the sod house, the cabin, all relied on one thing in the end: fire to push the cold back. Fire to remind you that humans can still shape the night. Before bed, you bank the coals so they will last until morning. You know exactly how much fuel to add. Too much, and the cabin overheats, then chills hard when it burns out. Too little, and you wake up with ice on your blankets. Winter expects precision. You crawl into your bunk, pulling your coat over your chest for extra warmth. The wind rises outside, throwing snow in thin sheets against the cabin walls. But your fire, small though it is, keeps winter from getting inside you. You listen to its soft ticking and let your body unwind. Fuel might seem like a small detail, but tonight it is the reason you can close your eyes instead of shivering through the dark. The West takes warmth when it can. Tonight, you take it back. The storm has passed by the time you saddle up again, but the cold it leaves behind feels like it has a personal grudge. The air is so sharp it almost rings in your ears. Your horse exhales clouds that drift upward like tiny ghosts. You rub your hands together, trying to gather warmth from friction alone, and you think about the next truth winter is going to press on you. Walls and fire matter, yes, but nothing matters as much as the layers wrapped directly against your skin. Out here, clothing is not fashion, it is architecture, and your bedroll is your last line of defense when the world decides to freeze solid. You tug your coat tighter and start riding toward a broad valley dotted with sage and rocky outcrops. Your shoulders ache from yesterday's cold, but riding warms you slowly. The trail crunches beneath your horse's hooves, each step a dry, cracking sound. You catch yourself thinking about the feel of wool, the way even the smell of it can steady your nerves when the wind tries to peel your face off. Cowboys learned early that winter clothing had to be layered wisely. Wool shirts, flannel, sometimes 2 vests, and a heavy coat lined with sheepskin or buffalo hide, if they were lucky. Wool is magic in winter. It keeps its warmth, even when damp. And believe me, everything gets damp eventually. Diaries from ranch hands mention wearing the same thick woolens for weeks in winter, and washing them only when the weather softened. Clean or not, those layers kept people alive. And yes, they smelled like a barn floor after a few days, but winter survival does not care much about elegance. You shift in your saddle and feel the coarse weight of your own wool clothes, scratchy, warm, a little stubborn. You remember the older hands explaining that you never, ever sleep directly against cold leather or bare canvas. Your coat might be good for riding, but for sleeping, you want wool close, then a hide or blanket layer over it, then the canvas of your bedroll trapping everything like a shell. The idea is simple. Wool keeps heat, leather blocks wind. Canvas keeps dew and ice from reaching you. It is a portable shelter wrapped around your body. Bedrolls were treasures on the range. Cowboys often carried theirs tied behind the saddle, a long cylinder of canvas with blankets, and sometimes a buffalo robe inside. The sound of unfurling a bedroll in winter is its own kind of comfort. A heavy flap, a stiff crackle of cold canvas, the soft thunk of blankets hitting the ground. You lay it out carefully because poor placement means a miserable night. If you set it on a slope, you slide. If you set it on exposed ground, the wind finds you by midnight. But if you place it in just the right hollow, angled away from drafts, your body becomes a small furnace. You dismount near a rocky ledge to take a brief rest, and you roll your shoulders, thinking again about the layers you wear. There was a strange bit of cowboy lore about winter clothing, one you heard years ago. Some riders in the northern ranges swore that rubbing a tiny bit of tallow on their socks kept feet warmer because the grease sealed out cold air. Others laughed and said it just made your socks slippery and your dignity vanish. Still, more than a few hands tried it. Winter makes experiments out of desperate men. You sit on a rock, loosen your scarf, and remember the importance of dry feet. Cold feet will ruin a night faster than any draft in a wall. Cowboys often kept an extra pair of wool socks rolled inside their hat or tucked in an inner pocket, hoping body heat would keep them warm. If your boots got soaked while crossing a creek and then froze, your feet were in real danger. Some riders stuffed their boots with warm stones before bed, letting the heat seep into the leather. Others slept with their boots under their shirts, using body heat to keep them from turning into ice sculptures by morning. Your horse nudges you gently, wanting to keep moving. You mount again and ride toward a small stand of juniper where you plan to test your bedroll setup for the night. The trail turns softer here, the wind blocked by rock bluffs and scattered trees. You find a small natural hollow, barely noticeable, but perfect for what you need. The cold pools in low spots, so you choose a hollow with just enough lift to stay above frost heaving through the grass. You clear the snow with your boot heel, revealing ground that is dry enough for bedding. You unroll your bedroll, and the sound echoes softly in the quiet valley. The blankets are thick, each layer holding stories of previous nights. Wool holds scent fiercely. Smoke, horse, leather, a little sweat, all woven together, strangely comforting. You lay a hide underneath, letting it form a barrier between the cold earth and your body. Then you fluff your blankets so air can nestle inside them. Air, again, is your secret insulation partner. Flat blankets trap nothing. Fluffed blankets trap warmth like a small miracle. Scholars still debate how standardized cowboy bedding really was. Some argue that most cowboys used whatever they had, from old quilts to army blankets to buffalo robes. Others suggest a fairly common pattern across ranches: a canvas outer shell, 2 or 3 wool blankets within, and maybe a hide for the coldest months. The truth is probably somewhere in the middle. You use what you can, but the essentials repeat because the essentials work. Every rider eventually learns the same rule. Sleep depends on layers. Layers depend on dryness, and dryness depends on knowing your land. You adjust your scarf, tug it around your neck, and think about gloves. Gloves were tricky business. Too thick, and you lose dexterity. Too thin, and you lose fingers. Some cowboys wore mittens with leather outer shells and wool liners. Others cut off the fingertips of gloves so they could rope or handle reins without fumbling. On brutally cold nights, a few even slept with gloves on, tucked inside their blankets, because warming frozen gloves in the morning is nearly impossible. You can almost hear an old-timer laughing at you if you ever let your gloves ice over. It is winter malpractice. Your breath fogs the air as you kneel to straighten your bedding. The sky is deepening toward evening, colors going from silver to iron blue. You sit on the ground, testing the warmth of your blankets, and you feel the cold trying to creep through the bedroll's underside. You add a second hide. Not pretty, but practical. A cowboy learns to notice temperature the way a musician notices pitch. A degree or two can mean everything by midnight. There is a small story that drifts back to you, one the older hands used to tell. A ranch rider in Wyoming once claimed he survived a sudden cold snap by layering nearly everything he had in his bedroll: saddle blanket, poncho, 2 wool shirts he wasn't wearing, even a strip of canvas cut from a spare tarp. When asked if it worked, he supposedly said, "It kept me mad, but it kept me breathing." Winter has a way of turning inconvenience into gratitude. You add one last piece to your setup: your slicker, not for rain tonight, but as a windshield. Cowboys often drape their slickers or spare coats over the top of their bedroll to form a partial roof, keeping frost from settling directly on their blanket. A thin layer makes a big difference. You tuck the slicker edges under your bedroll, making it snug. Now, when frost forms, it will land on the canvas instead of on your face. The first stars appear. The cold sharpens. You crawl into your layered nest and feel your body heat gather slowly, rising from your core into your hands and feet. The blankets become warm pockets around you. Your breath warms the small space inside the roll. Your horse shifts nearby, huffing in that rhythmic way that makes the night feel less empty. Winter is not gone. It is sitting a few feet away, waiting. But inside your bedroll, wrapped in wool and hide and canvas, you have made yourself a refuge. And as you close your eyes, letting sleep come, you understand the cowboy truth that clothing and bedding are not accessories. They are shelter carried on your back, shelter you can take anywhere the cold decides to meet you. The morning feels like glass when you open your eyes, every breath a thin ribbon of frost. Your blankets hold the last traces of warmth, but the instant you lift them, the cold pours in like water. You sit up slowly, coaxing your fingers awake, and your gaze drifts to the little pile of gear beside your bedroll. Metal glints faintly in the early light. Your tin cup, your kettle, the battered stove you sometimes carry on long winter rides. Today, the story moves from clothing and bedding to how cowboys turned scraps of metal into small, stubborn heaters that could bully back even the bitterest dawn. You get to your feet, pull your coat tight, and start gathering your things. The frost crunches loudly under your boots, loud enough to startle a magpie perched nearby. The sky is pale blue with a copper edge where the sun is trying to rise. Your horse paws at the ground as if impatient to get somewhere warmer, though both of you know the only warmth you will find today is the kind you build. Cowboys did not always rely on open fires. When they needed control, especially in tight shelters or when wind threatened to scatter sparks, they turned to little metal contraptions you might not expect. Old coffee cans with air holes punched in the sides, discarded bean tins converted into tiny stoves, sawed-off barrels that someone hammered flat at the bottom and propped with stones. None of it was elegant. All of it was effective. Historical notes from frontier ranches mention these makeshift heaters often, though usually in passing, warmed the shack with a tin stove or cooked beans on the little drum. You can imagine the scene. A cowboy hunched over a dented can, feeding it slivers of wood or chips, coaxing a flame, like a parent coaxing a stubborn child. Tins heated up fast, glowed red if you pushed them, and radiated just enough warmth to thaw fingers and soften hardened boots. They were portable lifelines. As you prepare breakfast now, you unpack your own battered tin stove, a squat cylinder with soot around its rim. You set it between two flat stones to keep it steady in the wind. The sun has not yet climbed fully, and your breath billows as you strike your match. For a moment, nothing happens. Then the flame catches a curl of dried grass, and the little stove begins its morning rally, smoke trailing upward like a fragile ribbon. There was a small, almost playful trick cowboys sometimes used with tin stoves. If the wind was fierce, they would set their saddle behind the stove to act as a visual and physical shield, directing heat forward. Another trick was propping the stove on a piece of scrap metal so the frozen ground would not suck the warmth away too quickly. Heat management on the range is half logic, half stubbornness. You learn what works because your fingers insist on it. Your coffee begins to warm in the kettle, steam rising in thin, eager lines. The sound is comforting, a soft simmer that hints at life returning to your limbs. As you wait, you reflect on how winter forces creativity. When cowboys lacked real stoves, they sometimes built tiny stone fireboxes, simple cubes, with an opening for fuel and a flat top for pots. The stones held heat long after the flame died, turning the firebox into a kind of primitive radiator. People today might not think of cowboys as engineers, but winter reveals that they absolutely were. There is one story you heard from an old range rider long ago, a story so odd you remember it every time you light a stove. He claimed that during a brutal cold snap in Colorado, he and two partners used a metal biscuit tin, packed with sand, and heated in the fire, as a nighttime foot warmer. They would bury the hot tin under their blankets and press their boots against it. He said it saved their toes. Whether he exaggerated or not is impossible to know, but the idea fits. When the cold hits hard, practicality becomes invention. You sip your coffee now, letting the warmth spread into your chest. Your horse snorts, stamping its hooves, shaking frost from its mane in sparkling arcs. You pour a little warm water onto its bit, knowing that cold metal against a horse's mouth can be agony. Small kindness, big consequences. A calm horse handles winter better than a stressed one. Then you turn your attention to the tin stove again. The flame burns hotter now, a cheerful flicker in an unforgiving morning. You cook a little breakfast on its surface, a biscuit warmed in tin foil, a strip of salted pork that sizzles faintly. The smell drifts into the air, mixing with the clean scent of frost. Food tastes different in winter. More urgent, more earned. You think of the cabins you have left behind, each with a fixed stove built from iron or salvaged scrap. Those stoves were sturdier, yes, but they tied you to place. The tin stove is freedom, portable warmth. Not elegant, but loyal. Cowboys appreciated that kind of loyalty from objects. They had little enough loyalty from the world. There is an ongoing debate among frontier historians about how widespread these improvised stoves were. Some argue that most cowboys depended almost entirely on open fires, except in permanent shelters. Others insist that travel stoves were more common than the written record suggests, because people rarely wrote about ordinary things. You tend to believe the latter. When a cold wind cuts through you like a blade, a tin stove is not a novelty. It is a need. You finish your food, pack your gear, and crush the stove's coals to ash. The small heater goes back into your saddlebag, still warm to the touch. You mount, pat your horse's neck, and set off across the frosted grass. The sun finally crests the ridge, casting long shadows behind you. Later, toward midday, the wind rises again, sliding cold fingers down your collar. You pause behind a rocky outcrop, pull out your tin stove, and light it for a moment, not for food this time, but for your hands. The warmth is immediate, surprising, like a handshake from a friend. In winter, that can be all it takes to keep yourself steady. You hold your palms above the small flame, letting numbness lift from your fingertips. You breathe easier. You think clearer. It is astonishing how much a few inches of metal and fire can change the color of a day. When you put the stove away again, your hands feel younger, more willing, more like tools instead of burdens. And that is when the cowboy truth settles in your mind. Winter survival is not just shelter or clothing or food. It is the accumulation of small defenses, a layer of wool, a smart bedroll, a pocket of earth, a scrap metal stove glowing like a red jewel. None of them could defeat winter alone, but together, they keep you moving. You ride on, warmed enough to continue, the little stove's heat lingering like the memory of a friend's voice. Winter has not let up. It probably will not for days. But you have one more tool on your side now, small and dependable, tucked into your saddlebag, ready to spark in the cold dark whenever you call on it. And in the vast, indifferent West, that kind of loyalty matters more than most people will ever know. You ride on through a stretch of land that feels both wide and strangely intimate, the way winter can shrink the world to whatever is directly in front of your horse's nose. The wind has softened for the moment, but cold still clings to everything like a stubborn idea. After hours of travel, the horizon begins to roughen with fences, sheds, the long silhouettes of barns. You are coming toward ranch country again, a place where shelter is not always something you build alone, but something you borrow or share. As you draw closer, the smell reaches you first. Hay, warm and dusty, wood smoke, horses. These scents slide into your senses like familiar voices, and suddenly you feel less like a wanderer and more like someone heading home. Cowboys might spend days or weeks riding winter pastures alone, but sooner or later, the job bends back toward a ranch center, a bunkhouse, or at least a barn whose walls promise warmth without asking for construction in the dark. You dismount near a broad barn with wide doors that groan softly when you pull them open. The warm air inside rolls out like a greeting. Barn heat is a particular kind of warmth, almost humid from the breath of animals and the slow fermentation of hay. You step in and feel it wrap around you, loosening the cold's grip on your shoulders. The horses inside stir, swiveling their ears toward you. Some lift their heads, their breath rising in soft white puffs. Others keep chewing, content in their routine. Cowboys used barns for shelter far more often than the old frontier stories admit. Many ranch journals mention riders bedding down in haylofts on brutal nights, especially after long shifts checking cattle or breaking ice at waterholes. A barn was not fancy, but it was warm, largely because animals made it warm. A single horse gives off more heat than most people realize, and a dozen horses can turn a winter barn into a steady, living furnace. You feel that now in the air around you, warm and musky and full of quiet energy. You stroke the neck of a bay gelding standing nearest, his coat thick with winter fluff. He bumps his head gently against your shoulder, asking for a scratch behind the ears. Animals teach you something about warmth that humans sometimes forget. Heat shared is heat multiplied. Cowboys often slept in stalls during emergencies, curled in hay not far from the animals who kept the cold from creeping too close. It was not glamorous, but it worked. You climb the ladder to the hayloft and settle for a moment, letting the scent of dried grass ease your lungs. The loft is dim, with cracks of light sliding in between boards. The hay is piled high, a soft, insulating world of its own. Beneath you, horses shift and stamp, each movement sending a tremor up through the beams. It is a comforting kind of noise, rhythmic and familiar. There is a small, rarely mentioned practice you recall, something ranch workers sometimes did when winter nights were particularly vicious. They would warm stones in the barn's small stove, wrap them in burlap, and place them under their blankets. This trick provided slow, hours-long heat, a kind of frontier hot water bottle, simple and effective. You have used it yourself on nights when even thick wool blankets felt like paper. But barns were not the only shared shelter in cowboy life. Bunkhouses dotted ranch yards, long, low buildings with rows of narrow beds, a pot-bellied stove at one end, and walls plastered with whatever passed for decoration. Old newspapers, sketches, snapshots, the odd calendar tacked crookedly by a nail. These bunkhouses were refuges not just from cold, but from loneliness. The sound of boots thumping on the floor, men laughing or arguing softly, the murmur of card games, all of it created a warmth that had nothing to do with fire. You walk now toward the bunkhouse door. It cracks open with a familiar squeal. Inside, the air is thick with heat, smoke, and the smell of strong coffee that seems to live permanently on the stove. A couple of men nod at you, their faces tired but content. One is mending a glove with thread clamped between his teeth. Another is rubbing down his boots with a rag, probably planning to keep them pliable for the next morning. You hang your coat near the stove, letting the frost melt into tiny beads that slide off the wool. The bunk you choose near the wall creaks as you sit. Thin mattresses stuffed with straw or rags were the norm. Not comfortable, but familiar. There is something soothing about the ordinary discomfort. You are surrounded by people who understand the tiredness inside your bones. Bunkhouse culture differed wildly across the West, and historians have never fully agreed on how uniform these winter shelters were. Some researchers describe them as rowdy, noisy, and chaotic spaces, where cowboys lived like overgrown schoolboys. Others paint them as relatively quiet places, worn down by hard work and cold nights, with riders too tired to raise much fuss. Most ranch accounts, though, sit somewhere between. Some nights brought jokes and music. Others brought silence thick as snow. There is a memory you carry from years ago, a quirky detail that still makes you smile. In one bunkhouse you stayed at, the men had a ritual of warming their socks on the stovepipe, each trying to balance them without burning holes. It became a kind of contest, equal parts skill and foolishness. Socks toasted perfectly were a badge of honor. Socks burned through were grounds for teasing that lasted weeks. Winter humor is strange, shaped by cold and repetition, but it keeps spirits alive. You nod to the cook, who is stirring something thick in a pot. Winter food is simple: beans, biscuits, beef, maybe potatoes, if the cellar still has some. But the taste inside a warm bunkhouse after a freezing day is something your memory never lets go of. Even a tin plate feels luxurious when your fingers stop aching. As night deepens, men begin drifting to their bunks. Someone pokes the fire to life, sending sparks skittering inside the stove. You can hear the low rumble of a story being told, the kind that is repeated every winter but still lands like new. Cowboys traded stories the way some people trade blankets. It was a way of keeping the dark at bay. When you settle into your own bunk, the mattress crinkles slightly under you. You pull your blankets up to your chin, feeling the heat of the stove drift slowly through the room. It is not hot, but it is warm enough to loosen your elbows and soften the stiffness around your jaw. Above you, someone snores lightly. Across the room, a boot drops to the floor with a dull thud. Small sounds, human sounds. The winter outside can rage all it wants, but in here, you are surrounded. You let your eyes drift shut and think of all the shelters you have used so far. Lean-tos shaped in darkness, dugouts carved into earth, sod houses rooted in prairie grass, cabins thick with smoke, and now, a bunkhouse full of tired men and shared warmth. Winter in the Old West had teeth, but cowboys built answers to those teeth in 1,000 quiet ways. Tonight, you are sleeping inside one of those answers, and it holds you gently. You wake before dawn, stirred by the soft shuffle of boots on the bunkhouse floor and the steady hiss of someone pouring coffee. The stove glows a faint orange, not quite roaring but alive enough to keep everyone from turning brittle in the cold. Outside, the wind has dropped, but the temperature has sunk even lower. It is one of those mornings when frost clings to every nail head, every window edge, every buckle on your saddle, as if the night is reluctant to let go. Today, you ride out toward a different kind of winter refuge, one that cowboys used whenever the open range pressed them close to civilization. A place that is not built by ranch hands or carved out of soil, but hammered, nailed, and warmed by the sudden friction of people living on the edge of the frontier, railroad towns. You leave the bunkhouse with steam rising from your breath like a trail marker. Your horse crunches through frozen dirt as you head toward a narrow road leading to the rail line. As you travel, the land slowly shifts. Fences tighten, wheel ruts deepen, smoke rises in distant columns, and then you see it, a small cluster of buildings clinging to the tracks like barnacles to a ship hull. Railroad towns were rarely elegant, but for wintering cowboys, they were pockets of warmth and noise, places where you could step out of the cold and momentarily forget it had ever existed. Many riders found themselves in these rough settlements after long drives or supply errands, seeking a bed, a fire, or just human company. Some stayed only a night. Others passed through so often they knew every warped floorboard by memory. You ride into town now, hooves echoing faintly on frozen ground. The first building that greets you is the depot, its windows glowing with lamplight. You tie your horse, stamp your feet, and step inside. Warm air hits your face like a soft slap. The depot stove sits in the corner, radiating heat in slow waves. A telegraph operator nods at you without looking up, tapping messages with a speed that suggests he has been awake far too long. You warm your hands beside the stove, feeling life return to your fingers inch by inch. Town depots were vital winter shelters for stranded riders. More than one cowboy wrote that the depot stove saved him from frostbite while he waited for weather to break or for a train to bring supplies. No one cared much if you leaned near the heat, as long as you did not drip snow all over the telegrams. The warmth was communal, a quiet agreement between workers and wanderers. But you are hungry, and the depot has nothing to offer except heat and the faint smell of coal, so you step back outside and follow the narrow street to the boarding house, a squat building with a crooked porch and windows fogged thick with human breath. When you push the door open, The warmth inside rolls over you like a blanket. A woman behind the counter glances up, gives a small nod, and slides a bowl of stew your way without asking questions. Boarding houses fed half-frozen cowboys all winter long, often without ceremony. The meal burns pleasantly in your throat, and for the first time today, you feel your shoulders melt away from your ears. The stew smells of onions, potatoes, and something cured long enough to make you trust it. You wipe your bowl clean with a chunk of bread and sit back, letting the heat from the nearby stove soak through your coat. Then you hear the clatter and laughter spilling from the saloon next door. Winter towns had their own rhythm, and saloons were their beating heart. You step into one now, letting the heavy door swing shut behind you. The air is thick with pipe smoke, lamp glow, and the smell of spilled whiskey. Cards slap on tables. Someone tunes a fiddle. The whole room radiates a warmth entirely different from a bunkhouse stove, the warmth of bodies and noise and stories piled on top of each other. Cowboys depended on saloons in winter for more than alcohol. They offered heat, light, companionship, and a break from the bone-deep solitude of range riding. Some saloons kept stoves blazing from dawn until long after midnight, creating a refuge that cost only the price of a drink or two. Even men who never touched whiskey came in simply to thaw and listen to human voices. You take a place near the stove, stretching your boots toward the heat. Someone nearby tells a story about riding through sleet so thick he had to navigate by the sound of fence posts. Another claims he once slept in the depot because he could not feel his toes after a night breaking ice on a water trough. The room erupts in laughter, not because the story is funny, but because everyone there has known that same helpless cold. There is a small tradition in winter saloons that comes back to you now. Riders would hang their wet gloves on a floor grate near the stove, creating an informal glove garden, each pair sitting like two tired animals waiting to be revived. Men joked that you could tell a cowboy's character by how neatly he arranged his gloves. Chaotic piles meant chaotic men. Perfectly aligned pairs meant someone you should keep an eye on, because nobody that tidy was entirely trustworthy. After warming yourself to the point of comfort, you wander the street again. The bakery's chimney sighs sweet, warm air into the sky. A blacksmith hammers sluggishly inside his shop, each strike releasing a ring that cuts through the cold. Even the jail, with its single-barred window, probably hides a stove that glows cherry red by nightfall. As evening approaches, you check into the boarding house. The room is small, the blanket thin, but the walls cut out the wind, and the mattress is not frozen. When you blow out the lamp, the darkness feels soft instead of sharp. You can still hear the faint hum of town life boots crossing the wooden porch, the murmur of late-night voices, the crackle of a stove somewhere below. Researchers sometimes disagree about how often cowboys truly stayed in towns during winter. Some believe riders spent most nights in remote line camps, coming to town only for supplies. Others point to letters and diaries showing cowboys frequently sought town refuge during storms or bitter cold spells. The likely truth sits between these extremes, shaped by distance, job, and sheer need. You can feel that need tonight. After days alone on the range, town warmth is not indulgence. It is medicine. You lie back on the rough pillow, letting warmth seep into your bones. The winter wind rattles faintly outside, but it no longer has a direct line to you. You are behind walls built by many hands, heated by many fires, protected by the sheer density of human life pressed together in this small outpost along the tracks. Shelter tonight is not something you carved or stacked or patched. It is something you stepped into a gift of community, noise, and shared heat. And as you drift towards sleep, you understand why even the toughest riders felt relief when a railroad town appeared on the horizon. Sometimes, winter survival is not about enduring the cold. Sometimes, it is about letting a little light spill over you from someone else's fire. You leave the little railroad town behind, with the sun just beginning to lift itself over the flat horizon, a pale, tired disk pushing through thin winter clouds. The warmth of boarding house coffee still lingers in your chest, but the cold reclaims everything else the moment you ride out. Your horse's hooves click against frozen earth, your breath spills into the air in soft, brief clouds, and you settle back into the rhythm of travel. Today you are returning to the work that defined so many cowboy winters, moving with a cattle drive, or at least a scattered part of one, and choosing night camps with the kind of precision winter demands. Out here, the land sprawls again, freed from fences and depot smoke. Cattle dot the low ground like slow-moving shadows, steam rising from their sides. You know from experience that winter drives are not neat affairs. In warmer months, Drives stretch long and dusty with heat simmering in every direction. In winter, however, the work tightens. Routes shorten. Camps matter more. You cannot outrun cold. You can only shape a safe place to sleep inside it. You guide your horse along a shallow ridge, scanning for the small group of riders you are meant to meet. The sky above is pale and high. It gives nothing, promises nothing, and that is typical for this season. When you finally spot the moving cluster of cattle and riders ahead, the sight is oddly comforting. Rider silhouettes, horses shifting, the steady lowing of animals, it all feels like a traveling village, a moving responsibility, a reminder that winter rarely leaves anyone alone unless they choose it. As you fall in with the group, you trade quiet greetings, nods more than words. Everyone saves breath in this weather. The foreman jerks his chin toward the line of hills in the distance. That is where you are heading, a sheltered basin with enough grass exposed to keep cattle from starving and enough natural windbreaks to make a night camp workable. Choosing winter camp spots during cattle drives was an art, not a routine. One seasoned range boss once said that picking a camp in winter is like shaking hands with the land. If the land pulls back, you move on. If the land grips firm, you stay. You ride through an open stretch now, your eyes scanning almost automatically. Cowboys on drives learn to look for signs that a place would keep you warm rather than betray you. A stand of timber might offer shelter, but only if it does not sit in a cold sink where frost collects. A rise might block the wind, but if the top is too bare, it becomes a frostbitten wind tunnel. The best sites are often halfway places. A slight slope, a natural dip that catches sunlight, but not too much shadow. A cluster of rocks that work as both reflector and shield. Some old drive journals mention winter camps chosen because a single cottonwood leaned just the right way, offering shelter like a crooked arm, or because a small creek bank curled inward, just enough to cradle horses from the wind. The smallest details could turn a miserable night into a survivable one. You watch the cattle too. They have their own winter instincts. When the cold deepens, they drift toward sheltered areas naturally. If they start clustering tightly in a particular direction, it often means that is where the land keeps them most comfortable. Riders sometimes followed those cues, not because cattle are wise in all things, but because animals feel the cold in ways humans cannot articulate. As the sun lowers, you reach the basin. It is a wide, horseshoe-shaped fold in the land, with trees along one edge and a low rock ledge on the other. You can feel the difference immediately. The wind softens, settling into a bearable murmur. Your horse lowers its head, ears relaxing. That is the sign you needed. This place wants to help, not hurt. The crew begins its evening routine. Some riders work the herd toward a central area, keeping them calm and bunched. Others scout the perfect sleeping spots. You join two cowboys who are searching for a fire location. You find a pocket near the rock ledge where the wind barely touches the ground. That ledge will reflect heat back, conserving fuel and saving your fingers from hours of cold work. There is a peculiar detail about winter drives that comes to mind. Riders sometimes used their horses as living windbreaks while building camp, positioning them in a loose semicircle, with their rumps toward the wind. Horses tolerate the cold better than men, and their bodies create a surprisingly effective barrier while you gather brush or prepare fire. In some regions, this informal circle was called a horse wall, practical, quiet, and deeply sensible. You unsaddle your horse now, rubbing its back with a brisk motion that sends steam rising from its winter coat. Taking care of the horse is not courtesy, it is survival. A horse stiff from cold cannot move cattle or carry you out of danger, so you tie it in a place where the ground is dry and offer a little grain if you have any. The animal presses its head against your shoulder briefly, a tiny gesture, but one that warms more than your coat can. The crew builds a small fire, just a small one. Large fires burn through fuel too fast and can spook cattle in the dark. Winter drive fires tend to be modest, built low and steady, more ember than flame. You sit close to it, hands outstretched, absorbing the heat that flows like a slow river from the glowing center. Dinner is simple. Coffee, biscuits toasted on a stick, maybe a piece of salt pork shared around. You hear the quiet clink of tin cups, the soft rustle of blankets being unrolled. Everything moves with intention. No wasted effort. Winter teaches efficiency in every gesture. As night settles fully, you look around the basin. The cattle form a dark crescent in the dim light, their bodies generating warm pockets of breath that drift upward like small fogs. The other riders settle into their blankets, boots slightly loosened but not removed, Slickers pulled over their bedding to hold off frost. Someone hums a low tune. Someone else mutters a single joke that earns a tired laugh. Researchers still discuss how frequently winter drives actually took place. Some argue they were rare, with most big drives held in warmer seasons. Others highlight ranch records showing plenty of winter cattle movements, especially in regions where storms pushed herds into unsafe areas or where grazing conditions forced periodic regrouping. Standing here, wrapped in a blanket under a brittle sky, you can see how both claims hold truth. Winter drives were fewer, but never completely absent. The West demanded adaptation year-round. You settle into your bedroll now, angling it so the rock ledge shields your face from wind. Your blankets warm slowly, holding the heat you have gathered from the fire. You breathe deeply, letting the cold air sting a little before it softens into your lungs. Cattle move occasionally, shifting weight, breaking frost crust with their hooves. Horses grunt quietly. The fire crackles in its shallow pocket, and the basin holds everything: wind, cold, men, animals, like a single great breath drawn in and held steady. You slip deeper into your blankets, eyes heavy. Winter has not stopped trying to press in, but tonight, the land itself is helping you hold it back. And in the long, tired world of cattle drives, that small victory is enough to sleep on. You wake to a strange quiet, not the peaceful quiet of a calm morning, but the muffled, heavy stillness that only means one thing in winter country: snow. You open your eyes to find the world smudged white, soft edges where there used to be sharp ones. The rock ledge above you wears a thick cap now, and the low trees lining the basin look as though someone draped them in cotton. Even your blanket has a fine crust of frost, where your breath froze during the night. You sit up slowly, brushing snow from your slicker, and the air bites before you can even think about warming your hands. The fire is a dark, collapsed nest of ash. Someone else in the camp is already trying to coax a spark back to life, hunched low with the kind of determination only cold can sculpt. Snowstorms in frontier winter were never polite. They also did not always give warning. Some rolled in with the speed of falling curtains, swallowing the horizon in minutes. Others drifted down quietly like this one, deceptively pretty but cold enough to drain strength from a man before he realized he was faltering. The kind of cold that demanded respect, not admiration. You stand and stretch, feeling your joints complain. The cattle are bunched tighter than last night, forming a thick ring of dark bodies against the pale earth. Steam rises from them, a soft, low cloud. They are uneasy. Snow means hard grazing and dangerous footing. Snow means trouble. You tighten your scarf and take stock of the sky. It is colorless, as if the world forgot to finish painting it. You cannot tell whether this is the end of the storm or the middle. Riding blind into a growing storm is a mistake cowboys paid dearly for. Some lost cattle, some lost horses, some lost themselves. As you help gather the cattle into a more protected corner of the basin, a memory rises, the kind of story every winter rider hears sooner or later. A cowboy once said he could smell a blizzard before it came, like cold metal and damp wool mixed together. Whether that was a gift or a tall tale, no one knows. But you can smell something now, that sharp, icy tang that pricks the back of your throat. Snow may not be finished. By midday, the wind returns, gentle at first, then sharper. Snow lifts off the ground in little snakes, swirling at your boots. You and the crew exchange looks. It is time to move. A storm like this can turn the safest basin into a death trap if the wind decides to start piling drifts. You secure your saddle with stiff fingers, grateful the leather did not freeze overnight. The foreman points east, toward a lower valley rumored to have thicker timber. That is your new target. But winter does not care about your plans. The sky surrenders another curtain of snow, just as you ride out. Soft flakes, then sharper ones, then a sudden sideways spray as wind grows impatient. Before long, the world goes white around the edges, and landmarks fade. Boulders look like beasts crouched in the distance. Trees become ghosts. Even your horse lowers its head, plodding carefully, sensing danger under every step. Snowstorms during cattle work were some of the most feared events on the frontier, not because snow itself is deadly, but because whiteouts erase direction. Men rode in circles without knowing it. Horses stumbled into hidden ravines. Hands ventured only a few yards from camp and vanished forever. Ranch records mention storm-related losses not with drama, but with weary resignation. The cold took what it wanted. A few riders in your group dismount periodically, checking the snow depth near low gullies. You join them. The snow is knee-deep in places, waist-deep in others. Too deep for cattle to graze if it stays this way. Too deep to ride fast if trouble hits. You feel the urgency tighten in your chest. But then you notice something. The wind shifts. Not in a violent whip, but in a steady, directional sweep. It brushes your right cheek now instead of your back. You look toward the timber ahead. Snow still falls, but the sky seems lighter above the treetops. A subtle change, maybe, but enough to give the crew hope. If you can reach the woods, you can build emergency shelters, stacked branches, snow walls, even shallow pits insulated with pine boughs. You push forward. Horses huff, cattle grunt, riders lean low in their saddles. Eventually, the first tree trunks appear through the white haze, dark pillars against a pale world. Relief sweeps through the group, though no one wastes breath celebrating. Inside the woods, the storm softens. Snow still falls, but the trees break the wind and quiet the sky. You feel it instantly, a muffled stillness that lets you breathe again. The foreman signals everyone toward a sheltered glade, a low bowl surrounded by heavy pines. This is where winter instincts kick in. Some riders gather fallen limbs, shaking snow free and dragging them toward the center. Others break pine branches to create thick bedding. You help carve a shallow pit with your boot heel and a branch, creating a depression just deep enough to hold warm air. In a storm like this, even a few inches matter. Air trapped beneath pine boughs stays warmer than exposed ground. You and another rider line the pit with branches, weaving them like rough cloth. The smell of crushed pine rises sweet and sharp. Your hands burn from the cold, then go numb, then burn again. But you keep working. Everyone does. Winter emergencies create a kind of silent teamwork, no orders needed, no complaining wasted. There is an old bit of range wisdom that crawls back into your memory. Some cowboys claimed that pine sap dabbed on fingertips could help warm them and seal tiny cracks caused by frost. Others swore it was nonsense. But more than once you have seen a man smear sap on split knuckles and sigh with relief. Maybe the warmth is real. Maybe it is only in the mind. But in storms like this, the mind is half the battle. You build a low snow wall on the windward side of your pit, packing snow by hand until it hardens. Snow walls are paradoxical things, cold as ice, yet capable of blocking wind better than many wooden fences. Some winter travelers built entire snow huts, but cowboys usually only needed a half wall, enough to redirect wind upward and away. By dusk, the storm has weakened, a tired swirl of flakes drifting lazily from the sky. The glade is quiet except for horses shifting their weight and the low buzz of someone carefully lighting a small fire. The flames glow golden against the growing dark. You settle into your pit, pine bedding beneath you, blanket over you, slicker stretched like a partial roof. The snow wall shields your face. The fire's warmth brushes your boots. It is not comfort exactly, but it is safety. And in winter, safety is a kind of luxury. You watch the fire flicker. Snow melts slowly on your slicker. Your horse stands nearby, steaming gently. And despite the storm's weight, the glade feels like a pocket carved out of the chaos, a small defiance against winter's wildness. Researchers sometimes disagree on how much storm preparation cowboys practiced. Some say riders were careless, trusting luck more than planning. Others argue cowboys were some of the most weather-aware workers in history, reading skies with instinct sharpened by necessity. Nights like this lend weight to the second view. You cannot face a storm without caution carved deeply into your bones. Tonight you sleep lightly, listening for shifts in the wind, the crack of ice, the rumble of cattle adjusting, but you also sleep warmly enough to face dawn. The storm came hard, tried to scatter you, tried to take more than comfort, yet here you are nested in pine, protected by snow, warmed by fire, alive. Winter has not won, not tonight. When you open your eyes, the world has softened into a pale blue calm. The storm has spent itself, leaving behind a muffled landscape piled with new snow. Your breath curls upward, slow and quiet, and the pine branches above you hold the tiniest icicles, each one catching light like a shard of glass. You sit up carefully, feeling stiffness pull at your shoulders and knees. It is a familiar stiffness, the kind winter hands you like a morning chore. The snow wall you built last night still stands, though its top has slumped a little. Your horse stamps gently nearby, shaking frost from its mane. The other riders are already stirring, brushing snow from blankets, coaxing fires back into being after the coals nearly died in the night. In this soft dawn silence, you feel the weight of another winter truth settling in your chest. Cold itself is dangerous, but cold mixed with moisture is a predator. Staying dry, truly dry, is one of the oldest winter lessons the West ever taught its cowboys. You crawl out of your pine-lined pit and stretch your fingers. The ground is cold, but not wet beneath the branches you laid last night. That single layer of pine kept the frost from creeping up through the soil into your bones. You brush off your coat, shake frost from your hat, and then check your saddle and gear with careful attention. Wet leather stiffens and cracks. Wet rope freezes into useless knots. Wet blankets become icy slabs that rob you of heat faster than wind ever could. You step toward a creek that cuts through the trees, its surface glazed with thin ice. It looks drinkable, but you know appearances lie. When a creek runs shallow in winter, water splashes and soaks everything it touches. Many riders learned the hard way that riding through even ankle-deep winter water can be ruinous. Wet boots in cold weather turn toes numb, then brittle. Wet pant legs freeze stiff against your skin, stealing warmth faster than fire can put it back. You break the ice with your gloved hand, letting your horse drink carefully while you stand far enough back to avoid splashing. While you watch, a memory slides into your mind, something a ranch foreman once told you. He claimed he could tell a cowboy's sense by how he crossed winter creeks. The reckless ones splashed through without care and spent the night trying to thaw their boots. The wise ones stepped lightly, found rocks, or dismounted, and led their horses across the driest line. You have seen both types. You learned which one you want to be. As the crew begins moving cattle again, you ride beside a younger hand who is worried about the weather. You can hear it in his voice. He keeps glancing at the sky, as if waiting for another storm to leap out. You remind him gently that storms come and go, but moisture is a problem whether the sky is falling or clear. If your gear gets wet, or if you sweat too much under heavy layers, the cold will punish you all the same. Sweat is the hidden enemy of winter riding. You may not think much of it in summer, but in winter, sweat is a trap. You work hard, get warm, start to sweat, then the moment you stop moving, the dampness freezes against your skin. Cowboys learn to pace themselves, stripping off a layer while working, adding it back the instant they stopped. A small rhythm that often meant the difference between a mildly uncomfortable night and a dangerous one. There's a faintly humorous but true bit of winter lore about sweat. Some riders insisted that if your shirt stuck to your back from sweat by noon, you were guaranteed to shiver through the evening, no matter how many layers you piled on later. Others countered that only foolish men let themselves sweat that much in winter anyway. But almost all of them agreed. Staying dry was not optional. It was survival. As the cattle move across the snowy basin, you notice one of the riders wrestling with a slicker flap that has frozen half closed. Frost crusts the edge like lace. You help him break it free gently. Frozen gear tears easily, and a ripped slicker is as good as no slicker at all. You rub the flap between your gloved hands until it softens, then latch it properly. Little acts of maintenance in winter can feel tedious, but skipping them is like leaving the door open for cold to walk in. You ride onward, eyes scanning for hazards. Snow hides ice, and ice hides water. A crack in the surface could mean a shallow puddle, but it could also mean a hidden seep, ready to soak your horse's legs and your own boots. Cowboys learn to read snow by texture. Powder usually means safer footing. Glossy, wind-polished snow often signals ice underneath. A crust that breaks sharply might hide air pockets that trip horses. You can't learn that from books. You learn it by watching hoofprints, by feeling how your horse shifts its weight, by listening to the crunch. Around midday, the storm residue begins to melt just a little in patches of sun. That's when winter becomes treacherous in a new way. Meltwater soaks your gear without asking permission. Your gloves become damp at the fingertips. Your ropes pick up moisture. Your blankets gather frost that transforms into water the moment they touch warmth. You take a break under a stand of trees and spread your slicker over a low branch. The sun, weak though it is, begins to lick away at the dampness. Cowboys often dried gear in small pieces throughout the day like this, 10 minutes here, 10 minutes there, never enough to stop riding, but enough to slow the creeping advance of moisture. And then, just as you settle to rest, you hear the unmistakable crackle of ice breaking behind you. Not loud, but sharp. A reminder, a warning. You turn quickly and see one of the cattle has stepped into a shallow patch of slush near the creek edge. Only belly deep for a moment, but enough to chill the animal dangerously. You and another rider move fast, guiding it back to firmer ground. Cattle can catch cold too. Wet hide in winter is a risk for them, as much as wet wool is for you. Once the herd settles again, you take another long look at the land. You can almost feel the moisture rising from the melting patches, and your instincts prick. Riders who spent enough winters on the frontier learned that wet cold kills faster than dry cold. Dry cold hurts, stings, exhausts. Wet cold sinks inward. It steals heat from your core. You do not let it. You adjust your scarf, pull your coat tighter, and take a moment to check yourself. Are your socks dry? Is your inner shirt clinging? Are your gloves damp at the seams? Winter forces this kind of self-audit. You learn to be honest with your body because arrogance freezes faster than water. Scholars examining frontier life still debate how conscious cowboys were about moisture control. Some think riders just learned from experience without articulating the rules. Others believe cowboys became almost scientific about dryness over time, treating it as seriously as food or fire. Judging by the countless stories of frostbite and hypothermia, avoided or narrowly survived, you tend to side with the second group. Nobody lasts many winters out here by ignoring water. As the day winds down, you and the crew reach a sheltered ridge where tonight's camp will form. You help gather wood, set your bed, and position your slicker carefully over your blankets, ensuring no snow will melt directly into your bedding. The air grows colder by the minute, but your gear is dry. Your horse is dry. Your clothes are dry. You have earned your warmth tonight. When the fire finally catches, and you settle close to its glow, your fingertips relaxing, you close your eyes and listen to the soft hiss of heat against cold. Staying dry is not glamorous, it is not heroic, but it is the quiet backbone of winter survival. And as you drift toward rest, you realize that every shelter you've built, every fire you've tended, every layer you've wrapped, is strengthened or broken by that one simple rule. Keep the wet out and the warmth stays in. You wake to a brittle dawn, the kind where sound carries strangely far, and every breath feels like it has corners. The fire you banked last night is nothing but a low glow now, faint embers pulsing under a thin covering of ash. When you push your blanket aside, the cold climbs straight into your bones, and for a moment, the only thing keeping you from sinking back down is the promise of hot food. Food is warmth you can swallow. Food is fuel your body turns into heat. And in winter on the frontier, that mattered as much as any wall or blanket. You move slowly, because speed in cold mornings invites mistakes, and mistakes invite numb fingers. Your horse is standing near the ridge, breath drifting sideways in thin ribbons. You pat its shoulder, feel the rough winter coat, and mutter something encouraging as if the animal speaks your language. It flicks an ear in response, which is close enough. Cowboys learned quickly that winter eating was not about taste or variation. It was about survival, through sheer calories, density, and heat. The staples were simple: beans, biscuits, coffee, maybe salt, pork, or beef if the drive was well supplied. These foods warmed you twice, once as they went down and again as your body wrestled them into energy. You crouch near the fire pit now, blowing gently until the embers flare. The coals pulse bright red, then orange, and you feed them a little dry grass and a few thin twigs until they catch. Soon the fire is alive again, shy but eager. The smell of warming earth mixes with smoke in a comforting way. You set your tin cup near the flame, ready for the morning ritual that every winter rider shared. Coffee strong enough to put hair on a fence post. There is a kind of seriousness in winter coffee preparation. Men joked about it, but the truth was, simple, hot, bitter liquid could bring a half-frozen rider back from the edge. You pour water from your canteen into the cup and sprinkle in coffee grounds, stirring with a stick until the mixture darkens. Soon the steam rises, carrying that unmistakable scent that belongs to early mornings and long trails. While you wait, you take out the small sack of beans and pork you kept from the last ranch stop. You warm them in a tin pan, stirring occasionally, the smell growing rich and earthy. Frontier writing from the late 1800s mentions beans endlessly. Some claim cowboys complained about them daily. Others insist men looked forward to them, because beans meant warmth and fullness. The truth is probably both. A cowboy could curse his supper and still depend on it to keep him alive. You eat slowly, letting the heat spread down into your chest. In storms, in lean camps, in drafty bunkhouses, beans and coffee were the closest thing to comfort food many riders knew. Salt pork makes your lips feel greasy, but it burns steady in your belly, the fat acting like an internal fire. Winter has a way of turning even simple food into a kind of medicine. As you finish breakfast, you remember a funny, widely exchanged bit of cold weather lore. Some cowhands believed that eating a spoonful of lard or a bite of tallow at dawn helped the body resist the cold. Others thought this was ridiculous, claiming it only made them sick. But more than one old rider swore he survived a blizzard because he had eaten enough fat to burn hot from sunrise to midnight. Maybe it worked. Maybe it was bravado. Either way, out here, belief itself sometimes kept a man warm. The day's work begins again. You ride through patches of snow, breaking trail for the cattle as your horse snorts and shakes its head. The cold sharpens everything. The sound of hooves crunching, the way sunlight glitters off frozen ground, the smell of your own breath warming the inside of your scarf. As midday approaches, you feel your energy dip, and you understand why winter meals need to be steady rather than sparse. The body burns heat at an astonishing rate when the air tries to steal it. Cowboys often ate small amounts throughout the day, keeping jerky in pockets or saddlebags, breaking pieces off as they rode. Jerky seems dry and tough in warm seasons, but in winter it is a slow-release furnace. On especially brutal days, riders sometimes melted snow in cups and mixed it with a little coffee or broth, sipping constantly to stay hydrated. Dehydration in cold weather was a quiet killer. Men forgot to drink because they didn't feel thirsty, and snow alone didn't provide enough moisture unless melted properly. A tired cowboy once wrote that winter drinks you dry without your knowing. You have seen the truth of that. By afternoon the wind shifts, coming colder from the north. You feel it tug at your coat and bite your fingertips where the glove seams are thinning. You stop behind a boulder to warm your hands over a small flame kindled from spare twigs. As you do, you find yourself thinking about how dependent the winter cowboy was on food that could handle freezing temperatures. Soft bread turned to ice, eggs cracked themselves, vegetables froze solid and spoiled. But beans, dried fruit, jerky, and pork stayed edible no matter how the cold pressed. One winter tale you once heard drifts back into your thoughts. A crew of riders caught in a sudden snap discovered their canned peaches had frozen. Instead of wasting the precious sweetness, they chipped the fruit out with their knives like chiseling ice from a pond. They ate it crunching, laughing about how summer got frozen on the hoof. Food didn't always need to be warm to help, but whenever it could be warm, it was a gift. As the sun lowers, you return to camp with the rest of the crew. The air has dropped into a sharper kind of cold, the kind that makes your eyelashes stiffen. You heat beans again, and someone passes around a tin of molasses. Sweetness is rare on the trail, but winter magnifies its comfort. Even a spoonful can make a man feel twice as human. There is a quiet debate among those who study frontier life. Did cowboys genuinely understand the nutritional side of winter eating, or did they simply follow instinct? Some say the riders had no real concept of calories or metabolism, just hunger and habit. Others argue that men who spent years on the range developed a practical intuition for what kept them warm, even if they never used scientific words. When you think of how your own body responds now, hours after a hot breakfast, the second explanation feels more likely. Instinct is its own kind of knowledge. Night comes down hard. You sit beside the fire, boots thawing, your belly comfortably heavy from a simple meal. The fire warms your face, while the cold brushes your back, reminding you that you are always halfway between danger and safety out here. The food you ate will keep you warm long after the fire dwindles. As you settle into your bedroll, the warmth in your belly becomes a soft glow under your ribs. Your eyes drift closed, your breathing slows, and you feel the steady hum of your body fighting the cold from the inside out. Fire warms your hands, blankets warm your skin, but food warms your blood. And tonight, that warmth carries you gently towards sleep. You wake before the sun has fully climbed, the sky still washed in a pale lavender that seems colder than blue. The fire is dead, but not forgotten. A faint curl of smoke drifts from yesterday's ashes. You pull your blanket tighter as you sit up, and for a moment the world feels like a frozen canvas stretched tight across the land. Then you hear it, your horse blowing softly, shaking its mane, and beyond that, the low murmur of cattle settling into their morning rhythm. Today, though, your thoughts wander toward another source of winter wisdom on the frontier, one cowboys borrowed far more often than the old dime novels admit. Indigenous nations had lived with these winters for centuries, long before ranchers carved lines across the plains. From them, cowboys learned quiet techniques, clever tricks, and deep-rooted knowledge of how to build warmth into shelter when the temperature dropped like a hammer. You mount up, riding through a patch of snow glazed with a thin crust. The trees around you stand tall and dark, their needles weighted with frost. Birds huddle silent in their branches. As your horse steps carefully, you catch yourself remembering the first time you heard an older hand speak about borrowing winter scents from native neighbors. He said it simply, without drama. If a people have lived in a place longer than you've been alive, you might consider watching how they stay warm. And so Cowboys did. You ride into a grove where a small ridge shelters you from the worst of the wind. The cold here feels more manageable, almost thoughtful. Your mind drifts to a technique used widely across the plains and mountain regions, lining ground shelters with cedar, willow, or pine. This wasn't just practical. Indigenous groups across the West used evergreen boughs as ground insulation for generations, knowing the needles trapped warm air and blocked dampness from creeping upward. Cowboys adopted that habit almost immediately. If you carved a shallow pit and lined it with fresh-cut boughs, your body heat stayed close. You slept warmer. You woke less stiff. You gather a few branches now, just enough to freshen your bedding for the next camp. The scent rises sharply clean, resinous, almost sweet. You store it in your saddlebag, grateful for this borrowed trick that never stops working. There is another method that comes to mind as the wind brushes your coat, a way of reading the land. Many tribes across the plains understood wind patterns intimately, choosing winter camp spots in gentle depressions or along leeward slopes where the cold couldn't pool too deeply. Cowboys, being practical creatures, adopted the same habit. Instead of building wherever they happened to stop, they began scanning the land for clues about how air moved, how snow drifted, how frost settled. You feel yourself doing that now, without even thinking. You ride along a ridge until you reach a view of the valley below. The snow gathers thickest in the center, thinner near the edges. You know the low point will become much colder once the sun drops. It always does. Cold air sinks. Indigenous knowledge taught that long before science textbooks explained it. Cowboys learned it by watching, listening, and sometimes shivering through the consequences. A small, quiet detail surfaces in your memory. Some tribes taught that sleeping with your head slightly elevated on a mound of earth or bundled hide helped keep moisture from settling in your chest during icy nights. Cowboys adapted this idea by placing saddles or folded coats beneath their bedroll, creating a raised headrest. It kept breath from condensing in the blankets and freezing. Simple insight, huge difference. As you ride on, the cold begins to sharpen again, a warning. You dismount near a willow thicket to check the creek. The water is low, rimmed with ice, and the banks hold a strange quiet. You remember something else, how indigenous travelers often built wind barriers out of snow blocks or stripped willow branches, bending them into partial screens. Cowboys copied this trick when storms threatened, creating half circles of woven brush to redirect wind away from their sleeping spots. You've done this yourself on nights when the wind felt like a living thing trying to pry your blankets apart. A memory surfaces of a Lakota elder describing how snow itself could be used as insulation. Snow traps pockets of still air, which means a shelter carved partially into a drift can actually be warmer than sleeping exposed. Cowboys learned to pack snow walls around their camps, or even bury the lower half of their lean-to in snow to trap heat. Strangely, the colder the snow, the better it worked. Then there's the matter of fire. Many native groups used long, low fires instead of tall, flashy ones. These stretched-out fires warmed a wider area with less fuel and avoided throwing dangerous sparks that could ignite shelter roofs. Cowboys traveling through timber country found this especially useful. A low line of fire, built parallel to the wind, gives steady warmth and cooks food more evenly. You picture one now, the orange glow spreading gently along the ground, warming the length of a bedroll without burning your boots. Another bit of winter lore you once heard whispers back. Some indigenous hunters carried small, flat stones warmed in the fire, wrapped in hide, and placed near their feet at night. Cowboys eventually tried the same trick, using hot stones to extend the life of a failing fire, or to warm frozen boots from the inside. Many boots and toes were saved this way. You ride a little farther, and soon the land opens into a broad meadow, with long shadows stretching across the snow. You slow your horse, breathing in the cold. The wind dips, quieting just long enough for you to hear the faint creak of distant trees. In that stillness, the insights of generations settle quietly around you. There is a scholarly debate you've heard more than once. Some believe cowboys borrowed only a handful of winter techniques from native nations, while others argue that cowboy winter survival, especially in the northern ranges, was deeply shaped by indigenous knowledge. The truth, as you feel it now, is layered. Cowboys borrowed what worked. Indigenous people taught what mattered. The land enforced the rest. In winter, wisdom never belonged to only one group. It moved like firelight passed hand to hand. Eventually the trail bends downward into a sheltered pocket where you'll camp tonight. Before you set your bedroll, you lay evergreen boughs on the ground, remembering who taught you that. You build a low fire, stretched long rather than tall. You angle your shelter so the wind has to climb over it instead of through it. Small choices, wise choices, borrowed choices. As night deepens, the fire's warmth pools gently along your side. The trees cradle the cold overhead, keeping it from falling too hard. Your blankets trap the rest. You breathe slowly, feeling the quiet stability of a camp built with old knowledge. And as you drift towards sleep, you understand that winter respect runs deep on this land. Cowboys survived not only by grit, but by listening to people who already knew how the cold thinks. Tonight, you are warmed by that listening. You rise slowly into the thin winter morning, the cold still pressing down with the heavy, unmoving patience of stone. The fire has slipped into its quiet slumber of ash and faint amber, but your blankets have held enough heat that the chill does not catch you completely off guard. You sit up, stretch the stiffness from your shoulders, and look out across a pale horizon. Today, your mind drifts southward, toward warmer winds and older traditions, toward the Vaqueros of Mexico and the borderlands who shaped cowboy life long before the word cowboy ever wandered into English. You stand, dust snow from your coat, and feed a few twigs into the coals until the flame stirs awake. As the fire grows, its light flickers across your saddle, your tapaderos, your cinch, your rope. Much of what you use every day carries the fingerprints of Mexican riding culture. Winter tricks, too. Not just the tools you hold, but the habits you move with. After you pack your gear and saddle your horse, you start riding toward a stretch of mesquite and low brush dotting the land like scattered punctuation marks. Snow lies thinner here than in the northern plains, and the cold carries a slightly different accent. Sharp, yes, but drier, with the faintest smell of heated dust beneath it. You ride quietly, listening to your horse's hooves crunch a mixture of frost and brittle ground. Vaqueros, skilled horsemen and cattle workers of Spanish and indigenous descent, were the blueprint for cowboy culture across the Southwest. Their techniques traveled north as ranching expanded, carried in the hands of men who understood cattle, horses, and weather far better than most newcomers. Winter knowledge, too, drifted upward, especially those small survival tricks well suited to cold nights that didn't always come with snow, but came with wind that sliced like wire. You reach a grove where the land dips into a shallow arroyo. The wind flows over the top, leaving the bottom calmer. You dismount and walk your horse down the slope. In this pocket, the temperature feels noticeably kinder, and you remember something you once learned from an older vaquero. Embrace the land's shapes, not its empty spaces. He explained that winter nights in the borderlands were often bone cold after sundown, even if the days were bright. The trick was to find a hollow, a fold, a wind shadow, and let the earth carry half the burden of shelter. You tie your horse near a mesquite trunk, its twisted branches scratching lightly at the air. The bark smells faintly sweet when warmed by early sun. Vaqueros used mesquite in winter for both fuel and structure. It burns hot, hotter than many northern woods, which meant smaller fires could give deeper warmth. You kneel beside a fallen branch now, scraping at its dry outer bark. It flakes away easily, perfect kindling. There was also a clever habit vaqueros used on cold nights, cooking thick, high-fat stews just before sleep caldo, chile con carne, or whatever ingredients they carried, because warm, spiced food lingered in the blood and kept the chill from sinking too deeply. Cowboys adopted this habit when working in the southern ranges, learning quickly that food seasoned with heat warms twice, once in the pot and again in the veins. You can almost taste it as you imagine a pot simmering on a cold night, steam rising with the scent of chile and garlic. As you walk the arroyo, you notice another detail: the way brush clusters near bends where wind hesitates. Vaqueros built windbreaks from thorny shrubs, mesquite, husake, even prickly pear pads stacked and leaned for shelter. Cowboys farther north laughed at the idea of sleeping beside cactus, but truth is, A good windbreak cares little about elegance. Even a half circle of thorny pads can bend the wind away and save your warmth. You push your gloved hand against a prickly pear pad now, testing its firmness. The spines prick your leather, but underneath you feel the heavy, moist flesh. In the borderlands, this plant was not just food in desperate times, it was also survival architecture. Vaqueros trimmed pads, scraped the spines, and leaned them against poles to create thick, insulating walls. Cowboys later used the same trick in scrub country, especially when storms came suddenly and wood was hard to find. A memory drifts back, something a wandering storyteller once shared at a campfire. He claimed vaqueros in Baja California sometimes slept with warm stones tucked into bundles of serape cloth, placing them near their kidneys to keep core heat steady all night. Whether entirely true or embellished, the idea feels right. Serapes heavy, tightly woven blankets were essential winter gear long before woolen cowboy coats became common. Wrapped around shoulders, laid under bedrolls, even doubled as makeshift tents, these blankets breathed warmth without trapping moisture. Cowboys borrowed the design, the colors, the shape, eventually weaving the Serapes logic into their own cold season habits. As midday approaches, the wind rises slightly. It nudges your hat brim and whistles against the arroyo walls. You cinch your coat tighter and ride onward, watching how your horse picks careful steps over frozen soil. You think about saddle blankets, how vaqueros layered several thinner blankets rather than relying on one thick one. This allowed better airflow, less sweat, and more predictable warmth during long, cold rides. Sweat kills in winter. Avoiding it is an art, and vaqueros mastered that art long before cowboys rode beside them. There is also the matter of rope. In winter, rawhide stiffens. Braided riatas used by vaqueros were treated carefully oiled, warmed near a fire, coiled loosely so they wouldn't freeze solid. Cowboys adopted these habits, knowing a frozen rope could mean losing a steer or losing control of a frightened horse. In harsh weather, a rope is no trivial thing. It is your connection to cattle, your balance, sometimes even your lifeline. You warm your own rope now by holding it near your horse's flank, letting the animal's body heat soften it. Old lessons echo quietly in simple gestures. As the sun dips toward late afternoon, you find a sheltered ledge to prepare for evening. You gather mesquite wood, its smell rich and earthy, and prepare a small fire pit. Before lighting it, you lay down a serape your own, worn but loyal beneath your bedroll. The fabric blocks cold rising from the ground, a technique many riders copied from vaqueros who understood the desert's nightly temper better than most. While arranging your bedding, you recall something scholars still discuss: to what extent cowboy culture is truly American, and to what extent it is a blending, a braid woven from Indigenous, Spanish, and Mexican origins. Some argue the cowboy identity is inseparable from the vaquero tradition. Others suggest the cowboy evolved independently once ranching moved north. Lived experience suggests something simpler. Cowboys borrowed what worked, honored what kept them alive, and carried forward whatever the land rewarded. Winter has a way of stripping ego from culture. Dusk settles softly over the arroyo. The sky turns violet, then deep indigo. You light your mesquite fire. It flares quickly, sending a fragrant warmth across your boots. You sit close, stirring your evening meal, adding a little chile powder you keep tucked in your saddlebag, a small luxury inherited from riders who believed warmth belonged not only in shelters but in food. When you finally crawl into your bedroll, serape beneath you, the fire's glow dances against the earthen walls. The wind whispers over the ridge above, unable to reach you here. You pull your blankets up to your chin and feel the layered warmth settle into your bones. The night is cold, but not cruel. You rest in a pocket of knowledge carried across centuries, shaped by people who read this land long before your boots ever touched it. Tonight, their wisdom holds you gently. By the time morning light brushes the sky, your fire has faded into a thin, glowing line. The arroyo is still, the air sharp enough to make your eyes water, but your gear is dry, and your body holds the last traces of warmth from the night. You sit up slowly, rolling your shoulders as the cold settles into its familiar place around you. Winter has not eased, but you have learned to move with it, not against it. Today you think about the little things, the quiet tools, the unnoticed objects, the pieces of gear that a cowboy carried not for pride or ornament, but because winter demanded them. Tools of shelter-making, tools of warmth, tools of survival. You brush snow from your saddle, tighten your cinch, and feel a strange gratitude for every simple object that has kept you alive so far. You mount up and ride into open land where the snow lies in patches rather than blankets. The sun hangs low but bright, turning every frost crystal into a spark. Your horse's breath rises like soft steam. The world feels brittle and beautiful at the same time. And as you ride, you mentally count the tools a winter cowboy trusted, the ones that made all the difference. Your rope, for one, not just for cattle. A good rope could anchor a lean-to when the wind was spiteful enough to peel canvas away. Cowboys often used their riata or lariat to lash poles together, holding limbs tight when building quick shelters. You remember more than one stormy night when your rope became the backbone of a windbreak. This morning, you uncoil it slightly, checking the stiffness. Rawhide can turn rigid in the cold, so you warm it against your coat. It softens slowly, obediently, like a loyal friend. Then there's the hat, wide-brimmed, felted, shaped to the rider's liking. Most people think of cowboy hats as sun protection, but in winter they serve another purpose, guarding ears, shielding eyes from wind-driven snow, and acting as a miniature roof when bending over a fire. You tip yours lower against the cold breeze, feeling how it breaks the wind just enough to matter. Your gloves are another story. They're not stylish, just thick leather with wool liners that never quite dry. Wearing gloves is its own battle. Too thin, and your fingers freeze. Too thick, and you can't grip reins or tools. Cowboys often carried spare mitts, or stuffed old socks inside their gloves for extra padding. You flex your fingers now, listening for the quiet creak of leather. They still feel stiff. You beat your hands against your thighs gently until the blood stirs. You ride toward a cluster of cottonwoods and dismount to inspect the branches. A small hand axe, hanging from your saddle, taps lightly against your leg as you move. That axe has saved you a dozen times, cutting firewood, trimming branches for a shelter wall, even breaking ice to water your horse. Frontier letters and journals mention the axe almost casually, but winter made it indispensable. On the range, a cowboy without an axe was half prepared at best. You run your thumb along its handle now, grateful for its familiar weight. Then there's your knife. Not the big, dramatic Bowie knife that stories like to mention, but a simple blade for cutting rope, shaving wood curls for kindling, and slicing frozen bacon. Some cowboys wore their knives on their belts, others tucked them into their boots. You keep yours at your hip, always reachable. Winter doesn't tolerate fumbling. A folded tarp or length of canvas, maybe the most overlooked tool of all, rests behind your saddle now. Canvas became lean-to roofs, windbreak anchors, emergency ground covers, even makeshift sleighs for hauling fallen wood. Cowboys sometimes patched holes in their canvas with wax or lard to keep snow from seeping through. You run your fingers over a patch you added last season. It has held well. You kneel by a fallen cottonwood branch and use your axe to split off small pieces. The wood is dry beneath its frosted skin. As you work, you think of a strange little habit the oldest cowhands practiced. Some carried tiny pouches of dry tinder, shredded bark, old cotton, even bits of horsehair. They kept them inside their coats so body heat kept them dry. Winter punished those who trusted nature to offer dry kindling. You carry a pouch like that yourself, tucked close to your chest. It's barely the size of your palm, but it has sparked fires in places where the world seemed determined to freeze. You gather enough wood for your midday fire and strike a spark with your flint. The flame catches quickly, thanks to a curl of that precious tinder. Soon a thin column of smoke rises into the cold air. You warm your hands, letting the heat sink into your bones. Every tool you've relied on so far contributed to this small, life-saving circle of warmth. There's also your bedroll, still tied behind your saddle. Canvas, outer layer, thick wool blanket inside, maybe a hide for the coldest nights. Cowboys treated their bedrolls like portable houses, rolling them tight, tying them securely, oiling the canvas so frost wouldn't seep in. Some riders kept a small sewing kit to mend tears. A ripped bedroll in winter was no small inconvenience. It was a threat. You check your own for fraying edges. So far, so good. Nearby, your horse flicks its tail and paws gently at a patch of grass. You walk over to check its hooves, clearing a bit of frozen mud. A hoof pick is another tool a winter cowboy couldn't ignore. Ice trapped in a hoof can make a horse stumble or bruise, and in winter terrain, a lame horse can put you in real danger. You clear the last chunk of ice and pat your horse's shoulder. It leans into your touch, trusting you completely. As you prepare to ride again, you take stock of the rest of your gear. canteen, repaired with wire, wool scarf, patched on one end, tin pots, dented but reliable, the little metal stove tucked into your saddlebag. None of these items would impress anyone. But in winter, none of them need to. They just need to do their stubborn, quiet jobs. There is a quiet disagreement among historians about whether cowboys truly carried more tools in winter or simply used the same ones differently. Some claim winter gear was minimal and riders relied mostly on the land. Others insist cowboys prepared carefully, packing extra rope, spare gloves, heavier blankets, and dry fuel. Your lived sense says it was a mixture. Cowboys who survived winters carried what experience demanded. Cowboys who did not rarely got the chance to argue the point. As the day leans toward afternoon, you ride with the faint warmth of your midday fire still clinging to you. The tools you rely on are simple, unglamorous, worn by use. But winter survival is built on exactly that kind of simplicity. Each object earns its place. Each gesture, sharpening a blade, warming a rope, oiling a saddle, holds meaning. When the sun dips low, you find a sheltered hollow for camp. You use your axe to gather branches. You strike sparks with your flint. You pull your canvas bedroll tight and secure it with your rope. Your gloves keep your fingers working. Your knife trims pine for kindling. Every tool plays its part. Small but vital, humble but irreplaceable. As night wraps around the land, you sit by the fire and let exhaustion slide out of your shoulders. You watch the flames curl, thinking of how easily winter could swallow you without these plain companions. Tools may not feel heroic, but they make survival possible, one quiet moment at a time. You stretch out in your bedroll, canvas crackling softly, and close your eyes. Winter waits outside the circle of firelight, patient and unchanging. But you are ready for it, because your hands, your horse, and your simple tools are ready too. And out here, readiness is the warmest shelter of all. You wake in the early blue of morning to the sound of steady breathing that is not your own. A soft huff, a shift of weight, the faint creak of leather. Your horse stands close, its body rising like a small hill against the winter sky. For a moment you simply breathe with it, letting that warm presence steady you before you crawl from your blankets. The cold snaps at your cheeks the instant you move, but the rhythm of that living warmth lingers. Today, you ride with a truth every winter. Cowboy learned early, sometimes painfully. Your animals are not just tools. They are heat, shelter, companions, warnings, partners in survival. Horses, cattle, even the quiet mules that carried gear, they all shaped how cowboys endured winter more than most people today realize. You sit up, brushing frost off your slicker, and look toward your horse. Its coat is thick and shaggy now, grown naturally against the cold. You step closer and rest a hand against its flank. The heat rolls off in steady waves. Horses produce warmth like small furnaces, and cowboys often borrowed that heat without shame. Sleeping near a horse was not romantic, it was practical. A warm body beside you meant the difference between numbed limbs and a working morning. As you repack your bedroll, you remember something you've done on especially brutal nights. You've tucked your hands under your horse's mane to thaw your fingers. You've stood behind your horse to block wind gusts. You've rested your forehead against its neck while the cold searched for any weakness. Many cowboys did the same, though few bragged about it. It wasn't heroics, it was instinct. You saddle up now, careful with the cinch so you don't pinch cold, stiff skin. As you settle in the saddle, you feel your horse's warmth seep into your legs. That living heat means more than comfort. It keeps blood flowing, keeps joints loose, keeps frostbite from creeping upward. Riders in northern ranges sometimes said their horses were the only reason they kept all 10 fingers. It sounds like exaggeration, but it isn't. You ride through a folded stretch of land where the cold clings low. Cattle graze slowly, nosing through snow, searching for any grass left from last season. Each breath from the herd rises in soft clouds that drift and collide like ghosts. And here you feel another truth. Cattle generate heat too. On winter nights during drives, cowboys often camped close to the herd, not only for safety, but because the big bodies warmed the air slightly. A thin comfort, yes, but in deep cold, every degree matters. There's a peculiar detail you once heard from an older hand. Sleeping downwind of cattle gave you a pocket of warmer air, but the smell was something a man had to make peace with. He claimed warmth beats pride every time. You've found that to be true. Winter doesn't leave much room for dignity. As you move deeper into the valley, your horse snorts sharply. Its ears flick, its steps shorten. You feel the change instantly. Something in the air, something ahead. Horses sense cold shifts, predators, thin ice, and brewing storms long before human eyes can confirm anything. You stop and scan the land, trusting the animal beneath you more than the calm sky above. There, in the distance, ice glinting where it shouldn't, a patch of frozen creek thinner than the rest. If you'd kept riding blindly, you might have crossed that point and ended up soaked or worse. You whisper to your horse, patting its shoulder. Trusting your mount is not sentiment, it's survival. You reroute gently, following a safer bend. The horse relaxes again, stride lengthening. You exhale, realizing how often your life has depended on four hooves making a good choice. Later, while you check the cattle for signs of frostbite, yes, even animals suffer it, you think of another winter practice cowboys learned from hard nights. When temperatures dropped brutally low, and there was no shelter, riders sometimes formed a loose circle of horses around the fire pit, positioning them so their bodies blocked wind from multiple directions. The horses' warmth helped too, but their bulk was the main gift. A ring of animals makes a surprisingly effective barrier, a living wall against the cold. You've been in a camp like that once, years ago. The wind howled, slicing sideways through the plains. The men huddled close to the fire, horses standing solid and still behind them like guardians. You remember the soft sounds of animals breathing, shifting, waiting out the storm with the same grim patience humans had. No cowboy ever forgets nights like those. You ride on now, scanning the land for tonight's camp. The sun's low angle turns every snowdrift into a long shadow. The world is vast and spare, but your horse's presence carves a path of steadiness through it. You feel connected, anchored. Then you catch a faint memory of a strange winter trick you once saw. A mule, stubborn, steady, unhurried, stood with its back against a blowing drift, while its packer crouched on the sheltered side, warming his hands. Mules may not be as glamorous as horses, but they endure cold with a kind of unshakable patience. Some cowboys preferred them because they panicked less in storms. They also ate less and kept their footing on icy trails better than many horses. You never underestimate a mule. Not in winter. Moving into late afternoon, you lead the herd toward a sheltered bend where sparse trees grow in a crescent. The snow here is thinner, the wind quieter. You dismount and loosen your horse's girth to let it breathe easier. The animal steps close, nudging your sleeve. Animals understand cold differently, but they feel it too. They appreciate breaks, warmth, gentleness more than most cowboys ever admitted aloud. As you start preparing camp, you let your horse stand nearby, using its body as a partial windbreak while you gather sticks. Its breath warms the air around your hands. You whisper a quiet thanks. Not ceremonial, just genuine. People who study frontier life sometimes argue about how dependent cowboys truly were on their animals. Some say horses were simply tools. Others claim they were partners. You know the answer without needing to read any dusty journal. Winter makes partners out of anything that keeps you alive. You make a small fire, arrange your bedroll, and settle in with your horse standing sentinel beside you. The night grows colder, stars sharpening above you, but your fire burns, your blankets hold heat, and the steady warmth from your horse adds one more layer of comfort that no amount of wool can replace. You rest with your hand on the saddle horn beside you, listening to the quiet chewing of your animal and the slow, steady breath that seems to steady your own. Tonight, the shelter isn't just fabric and fire. It's a living presence, warm, loyal, and patient as winter itself. You wake to the faint creak of ice expanding somewhere in the dark, a brittle pop like the land itself flexing its fingers. Your fire is nothing but a thin, resigned glow. Your horse stands nearby, its breath rising in soft pulses, and the world feels suspended in a fragile stillness. As you sit up, the cold settles over you like a stern reminder that winter on the frontier never truly loosens its grip, it only pauses. Today, though, the cold brings something else to mind: stories. Not the quiet, practical whispers of technique or shelter or fuel, but the tall tales and half-truths that cowboys swapped to fill the long winter hours. Stories that blurred the line between survival and legend, that made hardship feel almost entertaining when firelight danced on the walls of a cabin or lean-to. In winter, myths got mixed with memories, and the difference hardly mattered. You stand, shake frost from your coat, and stir the coals until a small flame stirs awake. As you warm your hands, your thoughts drift to a tale you first heard around a campfire years ago. A rider claimed he once survived a blizzard by crawling inside a hollowed-out steer hide, using the beast's remaining warmth to make it through the night. Others around the fire groaned or laughed, swearing he was full of nonsense. Maybe he was, maybe he wasn't. Winter has a way of pushing men toward desperate choices, and steer hides are thick enough to hold heat longer than they should. You've never tried it, and hope you never have to, but the story stuck with you because of that thin line between absurdity and possibility. You mount your horse and begin riding across a wide stretch of pale land. The sky is muted, painted in soft greys with a hint of blue. As you ride, you pass a scattering of rocks shaped by wind and frost. The land feels old enough to hold every story ever told on it. You picture cowboys hunched together in makeshift shelters, swapping tales to push away fear or boredom. Some stories were rooted in truth, others were stitched from winter delirium or whiskey. Take, for instance, the one about the rider who allegedly navigated a whiteout storm by listening to the breathing of his horse alone. According to the tale, he let the reins drop and let the animal lead them both to shelter. Some called it exaggerated nonsense. Others nodded quietly, knowing horses often sense danger far earlier than humans. The mix of truth and embellishment gave the story staying power, like frost clinging to fence wire long after sunrise. You steer your horse toward a line of broken cedar, scanning for a decent place to rest. The cold drifts over the land in slow waves. You pull your scarf higher and think of yet another winter yarn. A cowboy who supposedly used a fire-heated branding iron as a makeshift space heater by sticking it point down in the snow near his bedroll. They said the metal glowed and warmed the air enough that frost avoided his blankets. You've tried warming iron tools before they radiate heat, yes, but hardly enough to keep a man warm. Still, the story persists, retold because it sounds just crazy enough to work if luck and desperation collided. As you ride on, you pass a frozen creek. You dismount and test the surface with your boot heel. Thick ice, stable. Your horse drinks from a small opening you chop with your axe. Ice cracks sharply, echoing up the creek bed. The sound carries you back to another odd story, one that you've heard retold in 3 states, with 3 different endings. A cowboy trapped in an early freeze supposedly cut a hole in the ice, stuck his bare feet into the water briefly, then wrapped them in heated stones and dry wool to restore circulation. Some listeners gasped, others called it stupidity disguised as bravery. But the idea that winter pushed men to bizarre methods rang true enough that nobody dismissed it entirely. You remount and continue, the cold needling your cheeks. The land widens again, snow softening under the hooves of your horse. You search for traces of windbreaks or old camps. Winter stories cling to places like this, small hollows where people huddled close to survive. You picture a group of young cowhands in a storm, all claiming they knew a sure trick for predicting weather. One said the smell of sage thickened before snow. Another insisted that if the cattle faced uphill at dusk, a storm would hit. A third claimed he could taste a front coming in the air like metal on his tongue. Every man swore he was right. Every man contradicted the others. And somehow, every one of them remembered a time his trick had saved him. Tall tales grew legs on winter nights, especially in bunkhouses, where dozens of tired men lay under thin blankets, waiting for dawn. You've heard stories about phantom lights crossing the plains, spirits of frozen travelers tapping on cabin doors, ghost cattle appearing at dusk to warn of storms. Most were nonsense, but winter does strange things to the mind. Cold and darkness wrap the world in mystery. Sounds echo differently. Shapes blur. A tired cowboy in a snowstorm can convince himself of anything. And yet, mixed among the myths were more grounded, practical truths that sounded like lies simply because they were so unexpected, like the story of the rider who saved his frozen canteen by tucking it under his armpit for an hour while riding, or the man who slept with his wet socks inside his hat to dry them with head heat overnight. Both sound ridiculous. Both are entirely real tricks you've used yourself. You steer your horse toward a ridge where you plan to rest. The snow crunches underfoot like crushed shells. As you dismount, you remember one last tale, a strange, persistent one cowboys argued about endlessly. Some claimed that if you slept close enough to a cattle herd during a bitter cold night, the animal's breath would warm the air enough to keep frost from forming on your face. Others insisted that was nonsense, saying you'd wake up smelling so strongly of cattle that even your horse would keep its distance the next morning. Whether true or not, the story lived on, shaped by the eternal tug between humor and hardship. Historians sometimes debate how seriously cowboys took these tales. Some argue they were nothing more than entertainment. Others claim that hidden inside the exaggerations were real survival methods shared in disguise. Listening to these stories now echoes of cold nights and nervous hands. You feel the truth leaning toward both sides. Winter makes storytellers out of everyone. It also makes listeners pay attention, because even absurd stories can hide useful tricks. You gather pine branches and prepare your resting place, brushing snow aside and tamping the earth. As you work, you reflect on how winter stories served as a kind of informal textbook, passed from one generation of riders to another. Cowboys didn't hand each other written guides. They handed each other tales exaggerated, crooked, half true, half useful. Learning meant listening, sorting, remembering what rang true, and letting the rest drift away like smoke. Tonight, when you settle beside your fire and pull your blankets close, the cold presses against your back like a blunt question, but you feel steadier than you should, warmed not only by flame but by the memory of every strange, wild, unlikely winter trick ever whispered around a fire. Stories aren't shelters, but sometimes they build one inside your mind. You rise into a morning that feels older than the land itself, a slow, pale light stretching across snow-dusted hills. The cold is steady, patient, unshowy, more like a long stare than a threat. You dust frost from your coat, warm your hands briefly over the embers, and listen to your horse shifting its weight. The day is quiet enough that you can hear the soft click of ice breaking on a distant tree branch. Today your trail leads you somewhere different. Not out onto the open range, not toward the railroad towns, not into the dugouts or timber cabins of working hands, but toward another world tucked inside the west one, that winter shaped just as sharply, yet is rarely mentioned in cowboy stories. The homes of women, families, ranch wives, widows, and tough frontier mothers who managed winter with a kind of determined calm cowboys, sometimes envied. You swing onto your horse and aim toward a cluster of cabins near a frozen creek. Smoke climbs from one chimney in a slow ribbon. The smell carries far in winter, air-dry wood, a hint of bread or fat. You ride closer and catch sight of laundry stiffening on a line, shirts and skirts frozen into strange, windless shapes. When you dismount, you knock lightly on the cabin's doorframe before stepping in. A ranch wife stands inside, sleeves rolled, cheeks pink from stove heat. A pot simmers gently on the iron surface, giving off a scent that almost makes your knees buckle with gratitude. Children sit near the hearth, wrapped in thick shawls, drawing on scraps of paper or braiding bits of rope. The room is warm, smelling of coffee, flour, and wool. It's a warmth that wraps around you instantly. Cabins like this carried the weight of whole winters. Women kept fires alive, patched clothes with hands cracked from cold, and learned to stretch ingredients far enough to feed whoever came knocking cowhand, neighbor, stranger. Ranch women knew the winter in a deeper way, because they held the whole season inside four walls. You step closer to the stove, letting heat wash up your arms. The surface clanks and shifts as metal expands. These small stoves were the beating heart of frontier homes. Families used every part of them, drying boots on the pipe, warming stones to tuck at children's feet, keeping kettles simmering from dawn to dusk. You help by bringing in a small load of wood from the porch. The woman thanks you with a nod, no fuss, no dramatics. Winter made gratitude quiet and matter of fact. As you set the wood down, you notice another detail. Coats hung above the stove, to soften the stiffness that frost gives cloth. Gloves resting on a high shelf. A bucket by the door for melting snow. Winter homes were not merely shelters, they were systems, each part supporting warmth in ways that seemed simple from the outside, but took endless vigilance inside. A memory stirs. You once spent a storm-bound night in a ranch home farther north. While the wind clawed at the walls, the ranch wife taught you how she lined the inside of the cabin with spare quilt pieces to cut drafts. She had stitched them along the cracks in the logs, turning fabric into insulation. Cowboys learned tricks from each other, but frontier women? They invented half the tricks you later bragged about knowing. You sit at the small table now, sipping warm coffee. It burns pleasantly, chasing cold from your ribs. The children watch you with mild curiosity before returning to their chores. Winter chores for children included fetching water, feeding chickens, breaking ice on animal troughs, drying herbs, even helping twist straw or corn husks into makeshift mats to block drafts. Everyone worked. No one escaped winter duties. The ranch wife places a small loaf of bread near you, The steam curls upward. You break off a piece and let it melt on your tongue. After days of salted meat and camp biscuits, this is a different world entirely. As you warm up, you look around the cabin. Quilts stacked beside the bunks, jars sealed with wax-lining shelves, a battered coat hanging on a peg that once belonged to the woman's husband lost to sickness or accident. You're not sure. Many frontier women held their families together through winters alone. Their resilience shaped the hidden backbone of ranching life as surely as any cowboy's skill. There's a strange, tender detail you remember hearing once. Some women tucked heated bricks into their children's beds on freezing nights, wrapping them in cloth. Cowboys sometimes borrowed that method on the trail, heating stones by the fire, wrapping them in saddle blankets to warm their feet, a trick that traveled quietly between homes and camps, passed from mother to rider without anyone naming it a lesson. Children, too, made their own contributions. One boy you met years ago collected pine resin in summer, storing it for winter. His mother mixed the resin with ash to seal cracks in the cabin walls. That thick paste kept wind from slicing into the home. Another child gathered dry needles for fire starting. Evergreen forests taught entire families how to survive when snow fell thick. Tonight you stay with this family, sleeping on a bunk near the wall. While the ranch wife sews by lamplight, you help tighten the stove's damper, making sure the heat stays steady through the night. The children fall asleep quickly, wrapped in layers of quilts stitched with floral or geometric patterns, a soft beauty in a hard world. Outside, the wind rises just enough to remind you winter hasn't softened, but inside, everything feels gentler. The stove hums, the walls creak softly, the warm smell of bread lingers in the air. Some scholars who study frontier life debate how much cowboy culture truly depended on the unseen work of women. Some argue the cowboy world was separate, self-contained. Others insist ranch families shaped winter survival more than any trail crew ever admitted. You can feel which version rings true. The warmth in this cabin is made not by chance, but by unending labor. You lie down, the quilt heavy on your chest, and listen to the soft breathing of the children, the gentle whistle of wind outside, the steady pulse of firelight. Tonight's shelter isn't something you built out of brush or earth. It is something maintained every waking moment by hands that never rest, hearts that never waver. Winter on the frontier belonged to cowboys, yes, but it also belonged to the quiet, tireless strength inside cabins like this. And as you drift toward sleep, you feel held by that strength, warmed by it, grounded in it, as if the whole world has drawn closer around the stove to keep the cold at bay. You leave the family cabin before dawn, slipping quietly out the door so the warmth doesn't escape too fast. Frost clings to the porch planks, sparkling faintly under the moonlight. Your horse lifts its head and nickers softly, a warm greeting in the brittle air. You tighten your saddle, pull up your collar, and ride into a darkness, just beginning to pale at the edges. The land feels different today, quieter, emptier, as though winter has pressed a finger to its lips and the whole frontier is holding its breath. You aim toward a rough stretch of country known for trouble, an area where lawmen and outlaws both drifted, each seeking shelter in ways the history books only half remember. Winter didn't care whether a person wore a badge or carried a reputation darker than a moonless ravine. The cold pressed on everyone with the same steady weight. Yet how they built their shelters, how they navigated the season's danger, often revealed everything about their lives. Your horse trudges through patches of snow as you follow a trail etched into the frozen ground. Soon, the first sign of humanity appears, a set of old boot tracks partially filled with frost. Then a second set, both leading toward a rocky rise. You pull your reins gently, scanning the land. Lawmen patrolling Winter Range often looked for exactly this kind of sign. Tracks, disturbed brush, leftover ashes, winter preserved evidence like a diary written across the land. You dismount, crouch beside the prints, and touch the edges. They're old, 1 or 2 days at least. The cold preserves shape but not freshness. You follow them anyway. The trail leads to a narrow cleft in the rocks, barely big enough for a horse to squeeze through. Once inside, the world opens into a small hollow, sheltered on 3 sides by stone. It's the sort of place someone trying to stay unseen would choose. And indeed, someone did. You step deeper and notice the remains of a tiny camp ashes cold, a pile of dry grass flattened where someone slept, a boot heel mark stamped near the wall. Outlaws made winter shelters wherever the land offered them. Caves, hollowed logs, abandoned dugouts. even hastily built brush blinds barely large enough to crawl inside. Their shelters tended to be temporary, chosen quickly, used quietly, abandoned completely. A man on the run didn't stay in one spot long enough to build comfort. You kneel by the ashes, noticing the soot line along the rocks above. Someone built a low fire here, careful to keep it hidden. Winter fires gave off more smoke than summer ones, and smoke against white sky carried miles. Outlaws learned to burn slow, to use dry fuel, to start fires in hollows where the wind trapped the scent. You stand and run your glove across the rock wall. A faint black smear tells you the fire was shielded well. Whoever camped here knew what he was doing. You glance around again, noticing a piece of cloth caught on a thorny branch, dark wool, torn, frayed, maybe from a coat or saddlebag. Winter survival leaves its own little trail of breadcrumbs. You remount and ride toward a slope where frozen brush breaks the wind. The sun climbs slowly, lighting the land in cold gold. Ahead, tucked beneath a ledge, you spot another type of shelter one lawman favored in winter. A stone lean-to, small but deliberate, built from stacked slabs with a roof of brush and snow packed tight on top. Not pretty, but sturdy. Lawmen on winter patrol sometimes created semi-permanent hides, like this near routes where outlaws might pass. They needed warmth without revealing their presence. This shelter is exactly that. A low profile, almost invisible from a distance, built to keep heat in and eyes out. You duck inside and find the remains of a small cook fire, a few gnawed bones, a scrap of paper with a half-burned corner. Winter patrol life demanded quick meals, quick choices, and the ability to stay awake long after exhaustion begged for sleep. You sit for a moment inside the stone lean-to, feeling how the packed snow on the roof muffles sound. From outside, the wind rushes past, but inside it becomes a soft exhale. You imagine a lawman sitting here for hours, watching the trail without moving enough to break the warmth seal inside his coat. Winter was a test for both sides, those who enforced law and those who ran from it. Your horse paws the snow outside, so you step back into the open. The sky has now turned a pale blue, the kind that makes cold feel sharper. You ride onward, deeper into a stretch of land known for its hiding places. Ravines, old mining shacks, bandit trails. Winter pressed all of them into service for people desperate enough to rely on them. A sudden movement catches your attention. A fox darts across the path, its tail trailing like a brushstroke. It disappears behind a fallen log. Outlaws use such logs too, hollowing them out or stacking them with brush to create quick concealment. You once heard a strange winter tale about a pair of rustlers who hid under a fallen cottonwood for 3 days during a sleet storm, using the hollow trunk as both shelter and lookout. Their fire was a candle nestled in a tin, their food a pouch of cold beans. When the storm passed, they slipped away in silence. Whether the story was true or not, you can imagine that level of desperation in cold like this. As you ride farther, you reach a dry creek bed where snow lies thin. You follow it until you find the remains of an old cabin roof caved in, walls leaning inward. Ranchers sometimes abandoned cabins like this when winter storms made them unlivable. Outlaws occasionally used them for cover. You step inside carefully, brushing snow off the threshold. The interior smells of rot and old ash. A rusted coffee pot lies half buried in dirt. A torn saddle cinch hangs from a beam. Ghosts of old winters linger in such places. You crouch near the hearth, imagining the lives that flickered through this room, lawmen warming hands, fugitives hiding from wind and judgment, ranch families long gone. Winter equalizes stories. Cold doesn't choose sides. You sit for a moment in the sagging cabin, feeling the hollow quiet. There's an ongoing debate among historians about how much contact cowboys, lawmen, and outlaws actually had in winter. Some say interactions were rare, each group scattered across the land. Others argue that winter forced them into the same shelters, the same towns, the same narrow refuges where survival mattered more than reputation. You feel the truth, leaning toward the second side. Winter squeezes the world smaller. It pulls paths together. You leave the cabin and begin the slow ride toward tonight's camp. The light fades early, turning the sky lavender. The cold settles heavily, like a book closing. Your horse huffs, and you stroke its neck as you travel. When you find a sheltered hollow, you build a small fire, its glow warming your hands. You unroll your blankets, tuck your slicker over the top, and settle in just as the world slips toward dark. As the fire crackles, you think about the shelters you saw today. Quick outlaw camps, hidden lawman blinds, broken cabins that once held families. Winter makes every person honest, or not seek the same thing, a pocket of warmth in a land that gives none freely. You close your eyes, letting the fire's light pulse behind your lids, and drift towards sleep knowing that winter doesn't care who you are, but it always reveals who you become. You wake to a muted dawn, that pale kind of light that feels more like a memory than a morning. The fire has died down to a thin coil of smoke, and your breath unfurls in front of you like a thin flag. Your horse stands close, shaking frost from its whiskers. Today the world feels strangely still, as if the land itself is listening. And as you climb into the saddle, a quiet thought trails you. Winter shelters don't stay in winter. They travel forward, carried by stories, shaped into symbols, stretched into legend. You ride out across an open plain where the snow is patchy and thin. The sky above is washed silver, wide enough to swallow every sound you make. The land looks empty, but in the emptiness, you feel the ghosts of all the shelters you've known this season. Lean-tos twisted from branches, dugouts carved from earth, sod walls shaped block by block, bunkhouses thick with coffee steam, cabins humming over iron stoves. These were practical things once, but over time, they drifted into folklore. As you ride, you remember the first time you realized how different the truth of frontier winters was from the stories told later. Folks loved to picture cowboys sleeping under the stars every night, hats tipped low, blankets thin, courage thick. But you know the real picture. A cowboy sleeping under the stars every night in winter was not a romantic. He was desperate, or stranded, or unlucky. The movies forgot the wind, the frost, the small shelters stitched from panic and skill. They remembered the silhouette, but not the shaking hands. You crest a low hill and see a line cabin ahead, its roof half collapsed, its door hanging on a single hinge. Once, it was a lifeline. Now it's a prop in the theatre of memory. When you ride past it, snow sifts off the beams like the cabin is sighing. You dismount and step inside. The floor is littered with old straw, cracked boards, a few rusty nails, but the faint soot stain on the stone hearth hints at nights when men gathered here, thawing out after long shifts. You can almost hear them laughing, squabbling, telling half-true tales. That human warmth isn't here now, but something like it lingers in the smell of old smoke and weathered wood. You return to your horse and keep riding until the land folds into a shallow canyon. Down in the canyon sits the ruin of a dugout, barely a depression, with a few leaning timbers, almost invisible unless you know what to look for. You kneel and touch the soil wall, cold, dry, crumbling at the edges. But once, this was a winter home. Some hand long gone carved it with grit and a shovel, trusting the earth to hold heat like a cupped palm. It worked. It saved lives. Now it sinks back into the land without ceremony. As you stand, a memory warms you for a heartbeat. Years ago, you heard a traveling storyteller at a small-town winter festival spin a tale of a cowboy who survived an entire blizzard tucked into a dugout with nothing but a half-broken stove and a deck of cards. The story exaggerated everything, the cold, the loneliness, even the firelight, but the root was true. Shelters like this were the frontier's quiet heroes. The world just preferred louder ones. You continue riding, and soon the snow thins until patches of brown grass show through. The horizon shifts, revealing a distant ranch yard, the shape of a windmill, a line of fences, a bunkhouse roof still glinting with morning frost. You stop on a ridge and watch the buildings settle into view like a painting coming to life. That ranch yard is a story itself, one that Hollywood shrank into a backdrop, but once pulsed with real, gritty winter work. In movies, bunkhouses are rowdy havens full of jokes and songs. Sometimes that's true. Sometimes bunkhouses were silent, heavy with the smell of wet wool and worn-out men who didn't have energy for even one more sentence. In old letters and diaries, you've seen descriptions that don't match the myths. Riders sleeping fully clothed, boots half frozen, blankets stiff with frost at dawn. Not glamorous, but real. You ride down toward the ranch and pass by an old sod shed, its grass roof long dried. In many stories, sod houses get painted as symbols of hardship and backward living, but in winter reality, they were brilliant, warm, solid, windproof. A cowboy or ranch family who slept under a sod roof in January didn't feel poor. They felt smart. Warmth is its own wealth. You step inside the shed, brush your glove along its earth wall, and smile at the thought of all the folklore that came from these humble structures. Songs, tall tales, murals in old diners, costume sets in stage plays. People later imagined sod houses as chilly, primitive cages. But you know better. Winter warmth leaves its own kind of truth in the body. You mount again and ride out toward a frozen pond where thin reeds poke through the ice. The wind whispers across the water, carrying a faint echo of every cowboy story that got dressed up for nostalgia. In those stories, cowboys are weatherproof, unbreakable. But in real winter, cowboys were just humans up against a season that didn't bargain. There's a quiet argument among historians about why cowboy winter shelters faded from public storytelling. Some say the Old West got romanticized so quickly that hardship became inconvenient. Others argue the shelters were too humble. Too ordinary lean-tos and dugouts didn't fit the heroic pose. The truth you feel in your chest now is simpler. Shelters were practical, stories were emotional, and audiences prefer legend to logistics. But as you ride across the open land, you understand something else. Those simple shelters still shaped the cowboy myth, even in absence. The sense of independence, the grit, the resilience they were forged in brush huts, in earth walls, in cold nights under canvas, stretched tight by numb fingers. Even if the stories forgot the structures, they kept the spirit those structures built. The sun drops low, stretching your shadow across the frozen ground. You pick a spot behind a low ridge, gather brush for a fire, and spread your bedroll. The night settles fast, but the cold feels familiar now, almost companionable. As the fire sparks to life, the world glows gold for a moment. You pull your blanket close and look up at the first stars pricking through the indigo sky. The West is full of stories, some true, some twisted, some polished smooth by time. But winter has a way of reminding you which ones matter. Tonight, your shelter is real, your warmth is real, your memories are real. And the old frontier, the one that lives in myth and folklore, sits right beside the real one, breathing quietly in the cold. You rise into one of those rare winter mornings where the world holds perfectly still. No wind, no sound, just a pale sky stretching wide, and the faint warmth of your own breath drifting into the calm. The fire beside you has curled into a soft, red glow, steady enough to coax your fingers awake when you reach toward it. Your horse lifts its head, ears flicking gently as if greeting the silence itself. Today feels like a closing circle, the final turn in a long path through cold, shelter, and survival. You pack your bedroll slowly, not out of reluctance, but because the quiet invites unhurried movements. The land is soft with frost, each blade of grass encased in a thin glass coat. When you mount up and begin riding toward the low hills ahead, you feel winter watching, not threatening, not looming, but observing you with the calm certainty of a season that has taught every lesson it meant to teach. As you travel, your mind drifts over the long trail behind you, lean-tos built at dusk, dugouts carved into earth like borrowed caves, sod walls that held the warmth of afternoon sun long after dark, cabins thick with the smell of smoke and pine, bunkhouses humming with weary laughter, towns glowing with lamplight and human heat, shelters shaped by storms, by instinct, by borrowed wisdom and learned caution. Each one was a conversation between people and land. You crest a ridge and pause, looking out across the valley. The snow lies in ripples, soft as wool from this distance. Cattle graze in slow arcs below, steam rising from their bodies. A few scattered trees bend slightly under frost. In a place this open, warmth always feels like a quiet victory, carved from stubbornness and steady hands. You breathe out, letting the cold slip through your teeth, and realize how much winter has changed the way you see even simple things: stones, branches, creeks, wind directions. Every element became part of your shelter. As you ride down toward the valley floor, a memory flickers. A young rider once asked an old hand what the hardest part of winter was. The old hand said, "Knowing when to stop building and start trusting what you built." You understand that now. Winter survival is not just construction, it's judgment. It's knowing when your efforts have shaped enough warmth to carry you to morning. Along a narrow bend in the trail, you find the remains of an old winter camp, a ring of stones blackened with soot, a few curled scraps of canvas caught under frozen brush. You kneel and touch the stones. Cold now, but once they held fire. Someone else sat here once, trusting these rocks to reflect heat into tired hands. Winter shelters leave behind these quiet traces, small reminders that others walked the same hard path. As you stand, the wind shifts faintly, stirring dry snow into a thin, wandering veil. You pull your scarf closer and continue riding through the valley. The land opens again, and the sky warms just enough to soften the edges of the clouds. Winter light always arrives sideways, low and gentle, painting everything with long shadows that feel older than time. You make camp early today, not because of fear or weather, but because you want the last shelter of this long journey to feel deliberate. You choose a hollow near a cluster of bare cottonwoods, their trunks silver and still. The hollow blocks the faint breeze. The snow here is shallow, a perfect place to settle. You gather branches for a fire, nothing fancy, just enough for a steady flame. You build the foundation carefully, arranging wood so air can flow through it and strike a spark. The fire catches with surprising eagerness, rising into a warm, golden bloom that flickers across the cottonwood trunks. The heat touches your gloves, climbs your wrists, spreads up your arms. You unroll your bedroll, fluff your blankets, shake frost from the slicker that will guard the top layer. Every step feels like muscle memory now. Survival has become a quiet choreography, each gesture honed by repetition, sharpened by need, softened by understanding. You've learned when to trust wool, when to trust canvas, when to trust a horse's breath, and when to trust instincts older than maps. As dusk settles, you sit beside the fire, watching the land fade into soft blues and silvers. The world shrinks to a warm circle around you. The cottonwoods crack lightly as the cold deepens. Your horse lowers its head to rest, and you let yourself feel the full weight of the winter lessons that shaped your trail lessons about warmth, patience, caution, creativity, quiet bravery, and the strange companionship cold can create. You lean back, letting the fire warm your boots. You think of all the shelters that held you, how each one offered a small, defiant pocket of life against the vast, indifferent winter. None were perfect, none were permanent, but all of them mattered. And as the last light fades, you close your eyes, breathing in the scent of smoke and cold earth. The air is sharp but kind tonight, the ground firm but forgiving. You are warm, tired, and safe. You listen to the quiet, letting it settle into your chest like a soft blanket. Your breath slows. The fire softens into a gentle shimmer. The cold edges of the world blur, fading like distant stars behind low clouds. Every sound grows quieter. The land sighs, long and slow, as if settling into sleep beside you. Your thoughts drift like snowflakes, light and unhurried. The cottonwoods stand watch, calm and steady. You feel the warmth under your blankets deepen, spreading through your shoulders, down your arms, across your chest. The night wraps around you like a soft quilt. Even the cold seems far away now, a distant hum you no longer need to brace against. You breathe, slow and steady, letting your body sink into rest. Each exhale melts another layer of tension. Each inhale fills you with a quiet, comforting heaviness. The sky above stretches into softness. The stars glimmer faintly, flickering like embers drifting upward from the fire. And the winter world, so vast and relentless before, feels gentle now, peaceful, almost tender. You let your eyes close fully, surrendering to that stillness. Everything grows hushed, everything grows warm, everything grows soft. And sleep settles over you at last, quiet as snow.